Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of this exciting workshop, TP-MPC. I'll be chairing the session today. So in this session, we'll have two invited speakers. The first one is Erika, one of my beloved collaborators, right? Just to say a little bit about Erika. Erika is an assistant professor of computer science at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and she's especially interested in using cryptography to design resilient distributed protocols for tasks like Byzantine consensus, which is what she will be talking about today. Yeah, where a set of parties need to agree on some common input despite the poor network connections, right? And before starting at Reed, Erika received a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Haverford College and a PhD in computer science from University of Maryland with John, right? Yep. So let's wait for a second until she gets the microphone and
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Y'all hear me okay? Great. Let us get this clipped, then we'll get started. Alrighty, thank you for that lovely introduction, Chenda, and thank you all for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure. So I'm going to talk to you today about network agnostic protocols, and in particular I'm going to focus on network agnostic consensus protocols because it's my distinct honor to leave the multi-party computation side of things to Dr. Ashish Chaudhry, who will be on in just a moment. So without further ado, let's get to it. So I think many of you will be familiar with multi-party computation, given where we are and the purpose of the workshop. I think of one of the canonical problems that comes to mind for me, and maybe for many of you, is the millionaires problem. We have some assortment of millionaires who would like to figure out which of them is the richest without sharing any more than they need to or revealing any more than they need to about their inputs in order to answer that question. A very relatable problem, I'm sure we can all agree. So I think of the canonical consensus problem as the problem of making plans with your friends via text. So to say a little bit more about that, let's say that you and, say, your best friend, of course, are great participants in this process. You make suggestions for where to go. You're responding to your texts in a timely fashion. But unfortunately, not everyone is so on top of their game. Perhaps, unfortunately, one of your friends is just sending spam. Their SIM card got hacked. One of your friends is missing in action, MIA, isn't answering their texts. And another person you're starting to suspect doesn't actually want to go at all, but they also don't want the rest of you to go have fun without them. And so they're responding, but they're not super enthusiastic. They keep shooting down everyone's ideas and essentially just sort of getting in the way of agreement. So I think of this as sort of the canonical problem in consensus of reaching agreement in the presence of some faulty or misbehaving parties. So in general, we're going to primarily focus on a handful of specific consensus problems, but it's a big umbrella, it's a big category. And some common characteristics include that, well, the parties are trying to agree on some shared output despite the actions of faulty parties. And in particular, we usually are not all that concerned about our inputs being private. There are certain use cases where we might be, but in general, at least for the purposes of this talk, we're going to assume we're not altogether so worried about the privacy of our inputs. And so some example problems that you may have heard of, just to start connecting the dots, include Byzantine agreement, broadcast, and state machine replication. We're primarily going to focus on the first two. I'll formally define them when we get there. But for now, just for folks who are trying to connect those dots, I wanted to lay that out. All right, so as with MPC, there are a whole bunch of different models that we can and have considered this problem in. So for example, we can talk about the different fault modes of our particular nodes. Do they simply crash and stop responding? Do they actually become Byzantine and start sending malicious messages? In particular, we might be worried about parties that equivocate, that sort of send different or contradictory messages to different parties. We might be interested in static versus adaptive corruption. So in the static case, we might have an adversary who is forced to sort of commit to their corrupted parties or the parties who will be faulty beforehand, versus in the adaptive setting where the party has, or where the adversary has the ability to choose those parties that it will corrupt on the fly for sort of maximum impact or maximum mischievousness. So in this talk, we're going to be focusing primarily on Byzantine faults and primarily on adaptive corruptions, although that won't come too directly into things. And furthermore, in terms of security, in this talk, we'll be talking about primarily computational security as opposed to information theoretic, where our adversary is assumed to be in some way computationally bounded. This is important in part because we're going to assume the parties have the use of a PKI or a public key infrastructure to do all sorts of nifty things like sign their messages. All right, so now we're really starting to get to the heart of the talk, which is the assumptions we make about the network. So in particular, or let's just sort of go top to bottom here. So we can consider a complete graph in our network topology or an incomplete graph. We'll take sort of the quote-unquote boring route here, and we'll assume a complete graph, although there's been interesting work on incomplete graphs as well. And as for our channels, the actual links between parties, we're going to assume that those are authenticated. So the parties know when they get on the line to talk to Alice that they are talking to Alice. Now, this last one, this is the tricky one, and for our purposes, the interesting one. So MPC, consensus, all of these problems have been studied in a variety of what I'll call classical network models. Synchronous, partially synchronous, and asynchronous, just to name a few. More formal definitions to come in a moment. But essentially, we can think of these as roughly equivalent to very reliable, reliable eventually, and reliably unreliable. And we're not going to quite commit to any one of these just yet. What we're interested in doing today is something sort of outside the lines. So in order to set that up a bit, let's talk a little bit about what we know about these models from classical results. So each of the synchronous and asynchronous models introduce a different timing assumption. So in the synchronous model, there's some fixed known time limit delta that's known to all of the parties. And we are confident, or we are assuming rather, that messages are going to arrive within this limit. And on the asynchronous side, we're assuming that messages may be delayed arbitrarily. Now, there are well-known classical results that tell us the sort of fault tolerance we can expect to get in each of these cases. And again, remembering back to our model slide of a moment ago, this is considering a setting with authenticated channels and PKI. And in general, in our synchronous consensus protocols are going to be able to tolerate an honest majority, so any half will be sufficient. And in the asynchronous model, we can only tolerate an honest supermajority. So we need a higher bar, we need more parties on board and cooperating in order to achieve our goals in the asynchronous model. There's an asterisk there because for some problems you can actually tolerate more broadcast versions of broadcast, but for our purposes, I think it's helpful to have that honest majority picture in your head for the most part. Will serve you perfectly well. And so, as cryptographers, I think we look at any assumption and say, ooh, well, I don't know about that. I would really rather not make any assumptions if I don't absolutely have to. And in particular, I might wonder, well, is there somewhere, can I maybe get some way the best of both of these? I would really like to sometimes be able to tolerate more than a third faults, and sometimes I would like to be able to tolerate asynchrony, but maybe not both at the same time. So let's formalize this a bit. The way we chose to define sort of that in-between or that best of both worlds is that we're working in what we call a network agnostic model, where at runtime, the network could either be synchronous, and that delta has been fixed and known ahead of time, or asynchronous. And the honest parties, importantly, don't know which. This is where that agnostic bit comes from. We want to make sure that you sort of show up on the day, you've got your one protocol that you've all agreed on, and it's got to work no matter which of those worlds you're in. Okay? And so we define network agnostic security to be this following notion. So for parameters TA and TS, we're going to want security for up to TA faults when we're running in an asynchronous network, and security for up to TS faults if we're running in a synchronous network. Okay. Okay, so we can already start to map out where we might look or where we might go hunting for this type of protocol before we even get to the results of our work by just sort of mapping out the classical landscape. So here we have asynchronous faults along the y-axis, synchronous number of faults tolerated in a synchronous network along the x-axis, and we have, just to give ourselves a reference point, the line TA equals TS dotted out there. And so from these classical impossibility results, we can rule out a whole bunch of this right off the bat. So we can say, for example, that the classical asynchronous lower bound, which says that we need that supermajority, we won't bother looking anywhere in there. And similarly, that majority synchronous lower bound will just rule out that whole swath as well. Okay, what do we have as far as positive results? Well, for one thing, if you take an asynchronous protocol that's secure for that supermajority and plop it into our slightly weird network agnostic model, it will be perfectly happy because it doesn't make any timing assumptions. So that sits right at that n/3 point. And interestingly, and I think you could sort of make arguments either way, but I've chosen to say that standard synchronous consensus isn't really on the map because it doesn't necessarily have a well-defined failure mode in asynchrony at all. And so I sort of struggled whether I put it on the x-axis as in it has sort of zero asynchronous security, but really it may not even be secure for zero faulty parties, and so eventually I just said, there's not sort of a sensical way to map it here. And so that leaves us with this interesting region, this region that is not yet solved. And that question led to this jointly co-authored work. Myself, Jonathan Katz, Julian Loss. All of these affiliations are well outdated at this point. And this was our first proof of concept work in this area, in this model, for Byzantine agreement. And one thing led to another. We had a proof of concept computationally secure MPC protocol. We had a proof of concept blockchain protocol. We had this is that interesting tweak on the model where instead of being constantly synchronous or asynchronous throughout, it can actually sort of shift back and forth dynamically over the protocol. That one was pretty technically challenging to even define, let alone solve. But for the purposes of today's talk, I'm going to back up a little and focus here. And my hope is that you come away from this talk with an idea of what the constructions look like, what the proofs look like, and could even one day go on and work in this area. And in fact, I know that many of you are working in this area. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Okay, so the main contribution of that work was this sort of complete feasibility results for network agnostic Byzantine agreement. We built network agnostic Byzantine agreement that sort of spans this space here, where you can pick your poison, pick your preferred TA and TS anywhere along this line, and you can get a Byzantine agreement protocol that has those that network agnostic security guarantee. We also proved a matching impossibility result that says, actually, that's the best you can do. That's sort of, we enter no man's land on the other side of that line. There's sort of a similar flavor impossibility result to the classical results. Talk about that later. All right, so without further ado, let's get to our construction. So, as I said, we're interested in this region here. And as such, throughout, we're going to assume that TA plus 2TS is less than n. As I said, we'll get to showing that that's necessary. And we'll also assume that TS is between n/3 and n/2. And finally, that TA is greater than 0. The reason for that first one is because, well, I just told you that it's necessary, and I hope to convince you of that towards the end. But the reason for these two is, well, because that's what makes the problem interesting, or we haven't yet solved it. If you're happy with TS or strictly less than n over 3, well then an asynchronous protocol will perfectly suit your needs. Whereas if you don't need any notion of asynchronous security, well then you might as well use a synchronous protocol. Okay. All right, now it's time for some definitions. So we say that a Byzantine agreement protocol is secure if all honest parties output the same value. This is called consistency. All honest parties input the same bit B, then they'll all output B. We call that validity. And termination. Every honest party eventually outputs a value. And we say that a protocol is T secure if it's secure for up to T faults. And this is not an entirely standard notation, but because we're going to be sort of working at a fine-grained level with different thresholds in different models, and even on a property level, we're actually going to get to the point where we're talking about tolerating perhaps a higher number of faults for validity only than for consistency or other properties. It's helpful to introduce this notation that sort of compactly says, and also the protocol can tolerate T faults for this particular property. Otherwise, I would never get through the end of the talk. So in a little more detail, just to gain some familiarity here. So the consistency property says that all honest parties output the same value. In this toy example, we can see that consistency holds because both of our parties output 1. In this example, the honest parties had 2 different inputs, and so we're sort of ambivalent as to which value they actually output. And validity is our property that says, essentially, the output has to have something to do with the honest parties' inputs. And this property sometimes seems a little unintuitive at first, but what helped it click for me is the idea that, well, if we leave out this property, I can give you a one-liner of a protocol which says that everybody outputs 0. And that doesn't strike me as particularly useful as a protocol, and so we're going to assume actually that the output must have something to do with our party's inputs. Okay. So, main idea, or our main technique, is familiar, I think, to any programmers in the audience or anybody who's tinkered with some programming languages, and that's that we're going to handle our network errors. We're going to try what I'll call a primary path, which will be some sort of synchronous-looking protocol. And then if that doesn't work, we're going to fall back to a asynchronous-looking protocol. And in particular, what we're going to be sort of accepting, or the error we're going to be handling, is if the primary path times out. So I'm going to start with a straw protocol that does not work, and we're going to repeatedly iterate on it until we have something that does. Okay? So we have, let's say we have a primary path and a fallback path, and our sort of architecture or our design is that parties begin running on the primary path, and if they generate output, great, they go on their merry way. If they time out, then they'll instead go run the fallback path. And at least for the moment, we'll say that the primary path is just a standard synchronous Byzantine agreement, and the fallback path is just a standard asynchronous Byzantine agreement. So, are we done? Well, based on what I just told you, I think I gave the game away a little bit. We're not done quite yet. There's a problem here, and I'll show you why with a quick example. So let's say our honest parties come through the primary path, and they talk to each other, and they reach agreement, and they happily terminate and exit. And then along comes this poor fellow who was running a little bit late. And he waits and eventually times out. And then he pops over to the fallback path. And he looks around and he said, oh man, none of my friends are here. How am I supposed to reach agreement when none of my friends are here? And in fact, in the worst case, he might not be alone. He might be with a whole bunch of malicious parties. So let's back up. Okay? So why didn't they just wait for him? That didn't seem like a very nice thing to do. And the problem is that from their perspective, they don't know if he's ever going to show up. And essentially, if they wait for him indefinitely, then we have no hope of terminating. In particular, because we have that higher number of parties, or corrupted parties in the synchronous case. So then, what can we do instead? We're going to say that instead of directly outputting and exiting the protocol there, we're going to sort of reroute everybody through the fallback path. And at the time, I think, sort of as a little aside or a little historical note, I sort of thought that this was in some sense necessary, or at least I wasn't creative enough to think how you could design it in a different way. But I will say that there's been some really nifty work more recently that, that in fact uses a totally different architecture. So, all right, so we've changed the protocol flow. Oh, and the other thing I'll note right here is that parties are going to use, if they generate output from the primary path, they'll take that as their input for the next phase, okay? That's indicated there by that little B star. So if somebody generates output from primary path, that output is B star, that's their new input that they're going to carry into the next phase. All right, we're still not done. And that gets back to a little bit what I hinted at earlier, which is that the off-the-shelf guarantees of synchronous and asynchronous protocols are not exactly what we need in this case. So let's start with the primary path. So the off-the-shelf synchronous Byzantine agreement has no well-defined security guarantees in the asynchronous case. And so if I were to give you a little radar graph, perhaps I've been playing too many video games recently, so we can think of these as stats that our protocols have. And so our standard asynchronous BA has put all of its stat points into synchronous security and has next to no asynchronous security. Okay? This is what we can expect from our standard synchronous Byzantine agreement, is an honest majority in for all three properties, and very little in the asynchronous case. All right, I have to warn you now that there are Mickens diagrams ahead. This is where we get into some details, and this is mainly to avoid me reading pseudocode to you and you looking at pseudocode on a screen, but it does mean we have to deal with some Mickens diagrams. This is what I affectionately refer to as a Mickens diagram, courtesy of pretty, in my opinion, pretty funny piece by James Mickens. As an aside, I don't think James Mickens actually originated the style of diagram. He just made this very silly diagram. If you actually know where this style of diagram originated, I would be very curious to hear, so please do come talk to me. So, how we read a Mickens diagram is we have our parties along these horizontal lines. Time progresses from left to right, and each of these arrows is a message sent from one party to another. And we see that there are these different phases. So in this particular network, in this particular protocol, a client sends a request to server 0, who then says hello to everyone else in the network. And then the servers begin generating some random number, and then they maybe do stuff, and then they definitely do stuff. And I'm going to use a stylized version of this with our emojis along the left-hand side, perhaps because I don't have the same art skills as James Mickens. But we can sort of see that we've just sort of mapped this into a little bit more user-friendly style. So a quick convention, it's sometimes convenient for us to take a couple messy steps and abstract them into some sort of black box. So here I've taken the maybe do stuff and definitely do stuff steps and abstracted them into a little stuff sub-protocol. And furthermore, we'll sometimes want to talk about sub-protocols that are happening in parallel. So when we do that, we'll have something like this. So here we have several sub-protocols all happening in parallel, stuff, other stuff, additional stuff, even more stuff. And we can see that these arrows heading into those boxes indicate that, that those parties are providing input to the sub-protocol and then presumably participating. And then arrows out the other side represent those parties receiving some sort of output from that protocol. All right, so now that we're all experts in reading Mickens diagrams, we can get into the details. So, why didn't that off-the-shelf synchronous BA work for us? Well, guarantees aren't well defined in an asynchronous network. So we know that it can't be TS secure for the interesting value of at least n/3 due to that classical impossibility. And interestingly, even we don't need a catastrophic disaster for things to go wrong. So even mild failure modes of the fallback can be problematic. For example, let's say that it actually manages to guarantee consistency but not validity. Well, presumably our fallback protocol is actually valid And that means that it will sort of take in those inputs and output 1, which actually breaks validity of our protocol as a whole. So this is sort of to show that I'm not sort of hastily throwing out that primary protocol or that primary path. Even if it's sort of a little bit broken in ways we might be surprised about, we're still going to have a real problem that we need to solve. All right. So then, how to fix it? So the first insight here is that really the primary path in our asynchronous case just needs to do no harm. It just needs to not make things worse. And at that point, the asynchronous protocol will sort of swoop in and save the day, and everything will be fine. So in particular, just validity might be enough. We don't really necessarily need anything else from our primary path in the asynchronous case, except that if everybody was already in agreement at the beginning, we don't mess that up in the process until asynchronous agreement can swoop in and save the day. The second insight is that we may not even need a full-strength notion of validity. So what I mean by that is, particularly, we define this notion of weak validity, which I think will have a similar flavor to protocols with abort, or perhaps graded consensus, if you're familiar with those, which says that we even allow parties to abstain, or to say, you know what, I didn't see enough information from this protocol, I'm going to play it safe, I'm just going to sort of output a special value bot that says, I haven't really made up my mind. Okay. And so I claim that it's sufficient for our primary path to be TS secure and TA weakly valid in our synchronous case. And we'll sometimes call this primary with fallback validity. So in the fallback case, where we're asynchronous, we need to fall back to our asynchronous path, then we have that extra validity. All right, so we know what we want. Let's build it. It's pretty simple. So we'll have a bunch of broadcasts happening in parallel. Each party broadcasts their input. That's followed by a timeout indicated by the little clock there. So if we're not getting anywhere, we're just going to sort of pull the plug and move on. And then after that timeout, I'm going to look at the set of values that I received from that broadcast, and I'm going to decide on an output, or possibly I'm going to decide to abstain. So briefly a little bit about each of those little boxes. So broadcast here is in the sense of the consensus primitive. So it has a designated sender, PI, who's shouting their value out to everyone else. It has similar notions to Byzantine agreement. Briefly, validity tells us in this case that if the sender is honest, then everybody actually outputs that input that they provided originally. We have consistency, which says that everyone agrees on what that value was. In this case, for our particular purposes, we're going to allow outputting bot, although notably not in the validity case. It would not be sufficient for, we would not have validity hold if you output bot. We must output that particular Boolean value. And finally, we'll define liveness. And there's a bit of fuzziness around why we wanted to have words for both liveness and termination here. I'll sort of try to sweep that under the rug as best I can, but you can see all of the formal details in the paper. And we say that a broadcast protocol is secure if it is valid, consistent, and live. So our selection step is pretty simple, about as simple as it gets. So after the timeout, I'm going to take a look at all of the values I received from all of those broadcasts. If at least 2 TA plus one of them output some Boolean value, we actually sort of received something from that broadcast, then I sort of say, okay, I think I have enough here to make a decision. I think among all of these broadcasts, I've heard from enough honest parties that I feel comfortable making an official decision based on what I've seen so far. In that case, we'll output the majority value from among the Boolean values that we saw. Otherwise, we sort of haven't reached quorum. I haven't heard from enough different parties to be confident in my output, and I'll just output the special value bot. So then, let's step through our security here, convince us that we actually got what we wanted it to say on the tin. So for termination, this one, in the synchronous case, this proceeds pretty immediately from the fact that, well, we stuck a timeout on it. And in particular, for our purposes, I didn't mention this back in the model section, but in the asynchronous case, parties do not necessarily have synchronized clocks. If they did, that would make things, that would be an odd modeling choice, perhaps, and also a fairly powerful tool. But here, we're saying that there's a timeout. If the network is synchronous, everybody agrees on when that timeout is. If the network is asynchronous, then possibly different parties time out at different times. We'll handle that in just a moment. So in that case, then, termination follows from just the fact that we'll set our timeout, essentially, to be long enough that in the synchronous network, everybody gets through it. Okay, we'll set it longer than how long our protocol needs to run. Corrupt broadcasts may time out. There's nothing we can really do about that. They can simply choose not to input a value. So then, we know in the synchronous case that the number of Boolean values among those outputs is at least n minus ts, because we know that those honest broadcasts are actually going to terminate in time. And since we've assumed that ta plus 2ts, ooh, that should be a less than. That should be a less than. The number of Boolean outputs is going to meet that quorum threshold that we just defined. Okay, there's going to be enough values received that I'm okay to go ahead and make a decision. And therefore, each honest party is actually going to produce Boolean output. All right, still in the synchronous case, consistency. So honest parties are selecting from the same set of values because of consistency of the broadcast protocol. And that's really about it, actually. I expected there to be another bullet there, but there was not. Validity. So if we suppose that all honest parties input the same value v, then by validity and termination of our individual broadcasts, all of those honest broadcasts are going to output v. And that tells us that we've sort of reached a quorum of broadcasts that output v that's enough to overwhelm any of the malicious parties' votes in the honest majority selection. Okay. So because we have that ts is no greater than n over 2, each party is, in their local selection step, going to see that v as the majority value. All right, moving now to the asynchronous case. So for termination, this one is a hair more complicated, but only just. Each broadcast is either going to succeed or it's eventually going to time out because we have a timer running. And we'll allow that parties may output bot. That's going to be fine. Remember that asynchronous, the primary path later will come in to save the day. All right, and then the only other thing we needed from the primary in the asynchronous case was this weak notion of validity. It has no other jobs except to not indefinitely hold everybody up and to not break agreement if we already had it. So then, if we suppose that all n minus ta honest parties input the same value, notice that that threshold has changed. We have that smaller number of faults to worry about in our asynchronous case. So if an honest party, working backwards, if some honest party output a Boolean value, then they saw at least 2 ta plus 1 Boolean broadcast outputs. That's our threshold for when I make a decision versus when I say, oh, I don't know about this, I haven't seen enough yet. And by our original assumption, then at most ta of those outputs are not v. By original assumption, I mean that all of the honest parties input v. Therefore, any broadcasts that didn't output v are from malicious parties. And so pi's output, if it produced Boolean output, must be that original value v. So we're safe on the validity front here. All right, so let's recap what we've done. So before, we had this primary path that had sort of put all of its points or all of its security budget into security in the synchronous case. And we sort of just shifted some of that budget around a little bit. So in particular, we've sort of spent, or we've given up some of our synchronous security. That outer triangle has shrunk just a bit. And in return, we've gotten just a little bit of validity, which is all we need in the asynchronous case. And again, this is for any ts and ta of your choice, your favorite ts and ta, such that ta plus 2 ts is less than n. All right, so that's our modification to our primary path. You'll never believe this, but we actually can't take the off-the-shelf fallback path either. And it's a sort of similar flavor of result, so I'll fast forward a little bit through the details, but here's the bird's eye view. So the off-the-shelf asynchronous BA can't be secure for more than n over 3 faults. It's one of our classical results. And that's no problem in our asynchronous case. We're perfectly safe there. The problem is when we're in our synchronous case, hopefully our synchronous, or our primary path has done all the work, and now the shoe is on the other foot. The fallback path just has to sort of sit back and not mess anything up. Okay? But what we're starting with our off-the-shelf fallback path is that in either case, we have this nice supermajority termination, validity, and consistency. But that's not quite enough in the synchronous case, where we have TS faults. We have more faults than this. And so just to give us another little parallel example to the one we saw in the asynchronous case, the problem here is that even if everything is going great, we've reached agreement after that first primary part of our protocol, then the off-the-shelf asynchronous BA isn't guaranteeing us anything. Things can totally fall apart at that point. So I'm going to skip through the construction details, refer you to the paper, or come find me offline. But we sort of, again, shift our power budget from consistency and termination, where we don't really need it. We don't need more than TA of that, into validity. And so in particular, we're going to give up some of our termination and consistency for that extra validity that lets it sort of keep things together in the synchronous case. Okay. All right. So now are we done? Now we're done. This is all the modifications we need. We've sort of patched up the primary path. We've patched up the fallback path. We solved that problem where some parties were terminating early and leaving others behind. We're all good here. And let's see. Looking at the time, I think I will skip ahead a little bit. The proof sketch turns out to be very similar to sort of the arguments that we made previously for security of the individual building blocks. But essentially, we can reason through that in the synchronous case where we have TS faults, consistency and termination follows from consistency and termination and validity of our individual building blocks. So for example, by termination and consistency of the primary, all honest parties output the same B by the timeout. And then the fallback path just has to preserve agreement and terminate. And the validity argument is similar to ones we've seen before, so I'll breeze through here a little bit. And then in the asynchronous case, consistency and termination is again coming from sort of these complementary work together properties of the two protocols, where the primary eventually terminates, maybe because it times out, that's okay. And maybe not every party produces Boolean output, but again, that's okay. Fallback is going to be there to save the day. As long as all of the honest parties eventually begin running fallback, not necessarily at the same time. As I've said, our clocks might be doing all sorts of different wacky things, but as long as all of us eventually start running it, this is an asynchronous protocol, it's designed to handle that, it'll be perfectly fine. And then lastly, that tricky asynchronous validity. If we suppose that every party input the same bit B initially, well, then we know that each party, by the properties of the primary path, must input B to the fallback 2. This was that original problem we had where we might not necessarily preserve agreement in that case. And that's because either each party kept their original input, because we augmented our primary protocol to be weakly valid, or they actually saw valid input, and as we said, by the weak validity property of our primary, that has to be equal to their original input. So either they sort of they abstained after or didn't have any result from the primary, in which case they sort of say, okay, I guess I'll keep my original input. Or they did get output, but as we proved a couple moments ago, that output must be equal to their original input. Okay. And from there, the fallback can take it home. So then this is our end result. We started with sort of these extreme profiles or extreme security properties in either case, and we got some sort of, I think, a natural notion of an in-between, something that offers you a little less synchronous security, a little more asynchronous security, just sort of if you're the sort of person who wants to hedge your bets a little bit. Or if you're like me and you just wanted to know if it could be done. All right. I'll briefly sketch our impossibility result. So this is, for folks familiar with sort of Toeg's classical PODC 84 impossibility result, this will have a similar flavor. So our theorem says that there's no n-party BA protocol that's TA-TS network agnostically secure for TA greater than or equal to n over 3, or TA plus 2TS greater than or equal to n. The TA greater than or equal to n over 3 is just a holdover from the original asynchronous results, so we'll sort of breeze by that, and we'll assume, for the purposes of our proof, that TA is smaller than n over 3, but that we've violated this TA plus 2TS inequality. And again, the main idea here is that an honest party who's in an asynchronous network, their messages are being delayed, looks an awful lot like a crashed party in a synchronous network who I can't wait for. So let's partition our parties into sets S0, S1, and SA. And we'll consider this experiment, where we're going to delay all messages between the two groups, between S0 and S1. And we're going to deliver everything else within time delta. So things within one segment of the partition are delivered normally, things between S0 and SA are delivered normally, SA and S1 delivered normally. And we're going to fork each party in SA in the sense of forking a process and create twin virtual parties. And I'm going to call those new sort of twin virtual sets SA superscript 0 and SA superscript 1. Now, those virtual parties with superscript B in each case are going to run as if they have input B. They're going to send messages accordingly. And they're only going to communicate with folks on their side of this dividing line here. Okay? So, why did we pick this particular scenario? Well, it turns out that this is going to be the views of the parties in S0 and their corresponding ghosts are going to be identically distributed to the honest parties in this execution here, where we have some honest parties, let's say for the moment with input 0, and some other malicious parties who have crashed. And the reason why they look crashed to them is because of that wall. We're assuming that no messages are getting through. So, well, we've assumed sort of towards a contradiction that we have a protocol that works for these parameters. So by assumption, this protocol is valid. And therefore, in execution A, those honest parties are going to output 0. Otherwise, it wouldn't be valid. And so that tells us that their counterparts in the experiment are going to as well. And we can make a symmetric argument to argue that the parties on the other side of the wall are going to output 1. Now let's consider a different execution over here, where we have honest parties, and their communications are not getting through, just as we see in our experiment. So the parties with respectively different inputs are not able to communicate. And our little malicious party down here is going to play both ghosts. It's going to act as though it has input 1 when talking to folks over there, act as though it has input 1 when talking to folks over here. And again, we can argue, and I'll refer you to the paper for the more formal treatment, that the views of the honest parties here are identically distributed to the honest parties over in our experiment. But then we've said that, well, both of these look like the experiment. Pardon a little bit of hand waving here. But then validity in execution A tells us something contradictory to consistency in execution B. Okay. All right. Am I at time, Chanda? Just about. 5? 1. 2? 2. Okay, I can do 2. Okay, I like questions. Let's save some time for questions. I can do 2. Okay, so selected related work, and I really had to be selective, which is a wonderful thing to see that there's so much excitement in this area and so many people doing cool things. So we have our sort of proof of concept Byzantine agreement work protocol over here. And sort of some of the things that were happening before us and around us that inspired some of this were a couple different things. there were protocols that were considering this sort of idea of different thresholds. So instead of having one threshold that you use for everything, perhaps we're considering different thresholds based on other assumptions. We're considering different thresholds for different properties, and that sort of was, I think, a bit of an aha moment for us as we were thinking about this. And furthermore, there were a smattering of interesting works, can't possibly put all of them here, but who were reasoning about what does a synchronous or partially synchronous protocol do? What does failure look like for those protocols in asynchrony? Now, sort of moving forward, we have a couple of our proof of concept works along the top, some really nifty, interesting work that I think I'll have to take offline, but essentially a really nifty black box construction, as I mentioned, that sort of gets away with using those off-the-shelf protocols and combining them in a neat way. We have folks working on network agnostic consensus and constant time, and then a variety of other works, several by our fabulous session chair, Chenda, I believe is the C here, and I think there. And then finally, we have some really nifty work, of which this is only a very, very small part, on MPC with asynchronous fallback, which, as I said, Dr. Chowdhury is about to take it away. So I'll leave that to him, I think, to expand on. But so if you take away one thing, I think it should be that network agnostic security is like error handling for your network assumption. So what happens if something goes wrong? What can we possibly guarantee? If you take away two things, first thing, plus that we have these nifty matching feasibility and impossibility results, and you might tuck that away in the back of your brain in case you run into a problem where that could be useful. And finally, lots and lots of cool progress that I will be happy to talk your ear off about offline if you're interested at all, including Dr. Chowdhury's work on MPC coming up next. So without further ado, thank you all very much for letting me talk to you about something I find really exciting, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the nice talk. Questions? Ashish, I guess.
Okay, so thanks for the wonderful talk. So just wondering, is this architecture necessary, this primary path followed by the fallback path?
That's a great question. So let's see. I'm not aware of works that don't have some sort of primary and fallback module. However, the particular way in which we've linked them here, I have seen some really nifty improvements and innovations on. So for example, I believe there's one where you actually don't have to run the fallback path if the primary path succeeds, which I believe, and I hope I'm getting this right, is the innovation behind that constant time work by other folks on the previous slide. Great question, thank you.
So I personally spent some time with this network agnostic, but in the perfect setting. And I felt designing protocol is extremely challenging. And while I was very happy with the theoretical progress that I have made, I was very skeptical about these things being practical. But you showed me something in the previous slides about proof of concepts. These are all in the network agnostic setting. So my question is, do you really foresee that protocols in this setting are going to be used in practice? Because this is really a very practical model.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you very much. So let's see. So I think the first thing I'll hedge is that I'm not familiar with the hidden constants in the constant time work. So a little bit, I'm interested to go dig into that and see how practical those constants are. But I think on a similar note, I don't see this as a one-size-fits-all protocol per se. I don't necessarily advocate that everyone go adopt this in every situation, but I do think for settings where you've perhaps done some network measurements or some fault analysis, and you are sometimes both concerned about that n/3 and that asynchrony, I think it could make sense for sort of the very cautious among us for whom that consideration or those concerns outweigh other folks or other concerns. So I don't think it's necessarily a one-size-fits-all tool, but I think there are scenarios in which I could see you reaching for that tool in your toolbox. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the wonderful talk. So it seems like there are two different assumptions or models here, which, and I wanted to basically clarify if I'm mistaken in anything. So firstly, we have like a synchronous network and an asynchronous network, but the synchronous network delivers message within the time bound. And second, it seems like parties have local clocks which are synchronized in the synchronous case, but not synchronized in the asynchronous case. So are these two things really the same thing? And in any case, is it possible to get synchronized clocks in a network agnostic setting?
Okay. So let me see. So we have in this setting, I think of it as sort of a Schrodinger's network, where until running time, the network is both synchronous with more faults or asynchronous with fewer faults, and then at runtime we open the box and it collapses into one or the other. However, that's sort of us looking down from above. Rather, the parties don't actually see the result of opening the box. They just sort of have to proceed blindly and hope that their protocol is going to do the right thing regardless of which setting they're in. And then yes, you are right that in the synchronous, when we open the box and the network is synchronous, then parties have local clocks that we assume to be synchronized. And in the asynchronous case, we assume that they have some timekeeping mechanism that is not necessarily, is sort of arbitrarily different from other parties. There could be arbitrary skew, but will essentially just allow us to at some point say, all right, enough of that, this isn't working, let's move on. Did that answer your questions?
Yeah, so I guess these are two, like the clock assumption, not assumption, the clock model and the network model, these are two different things, right? It's really saying two separate things.
Yes, I think you certainly could include the assumption about the clocks and when they're synchronized and what assumptions you make about them could easily be its own line in the model slide. And in fact, I might put that in my pocket for the next version of this talk, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. Let's take the next questions offline. Yeah, to give you this, I guess.
Oh, over here. Oh, thank you.
So our next speaker is Ashish. So Ashish received his PhD in computer science from IIT Madras in India, and he held postdoctoral positions at the University of Bristol and the Indian Statistical Institute. And he has done a lot of research in theoretical cryptography, right, with special focus on analyzing MPC protocols. He has authored multiple MOOCs on cryptography and secure multi-party computation on NPTEL, and he has also co-authored a research monogram titled Secure Multi-Party Computation Against Passive Adversaries, and other monograms on fault-tolerant distributed consensus in synchronous networks. And I'm very excited to hear about what he has to say in network agnostic MPC, because back then when we started working in this area, we didn't know how to do MPC without tools like homomorphic encryption and so on, right? And he was the first that could give like some ideas on how to do this with less cryptography.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Chen, for the introduction, and I would like to thank the organizers of TPMPC 2025 for giving me this opportunity to talk about my research on network agnostic MPC. So to begin with, I would like to thank these wonderful people who are now holding various positions. When they were undergrad students, they did their thesis work with me at IIIT, and they did some fantastic work on network agnostic secure distributed computing. So I will be briefly talking about the first two works, the first and the third work, and I will be going into the details of the second work here. So since this is a workshop on MPC, I won't spend much time in defining what is MPC. In an MPC protocol, we have a bunch of parties with private inputs, and together they are interested to securely compute a function, publicly known function, even in the presence of an adversary who could control and corrupt a subset of up to T parties and force them to behave in any arbitrary fashion. Now, traditionally in the MPC literature, protocols have been designed either assuming a synchronous or an asynchronous communication model. So in the synchronous communication model, the assumption is that every sent message will be delivered within some publicly known time, say delta, which will be known to all the protocol participants. And if a receiver party doesn't receive a message within that delta time, it knows that the corresponding sender party is a corrupt party. However, real-world networks like the internet do not behave like this, because occasionally the network might become very slow. So to model such networks, we have the asynchronous model where the messages could be arbitrarily delayed, and the only assumption is that every sent message will be eventually delivered. However, the challenge in an asynchronous, designing a protocol in the asynchronous model is that from the viewpoint of a receiver party, it doesn't know how long it has to wait for an expected message. And because of that, it don't know whether the sender party has sent a message or not. And that actually makes designing protocols in the asynchronous model very challenging. And that is reflected in the resilience bounds for the synchronous and asynchronous MPC protocols. So if TS is the number of faults which we could tolerate in a synchronous MPC protocols, and if TA is the number of faults which we could tolerate in an asynchronous MPC protocol, then typically TS is much larger than TA. However, irrespective of whether we are designing a synchronous or asynchronous MPC, the assumption is that the protocol participants will be knowing beforehand how the underlying network is going to behave. But what happens if the following occurs? That we assume that the network is going to behave in a synchronous fashion. We are running a synchronous MPC, but the network turns out to be asynchronous, and vice versa. Right? So that's going to create a trouble. So an interesting question here is that, can we design a protocol which provides us the best possible security guarantees where the parties will not be knowing how the underlying network is going to behave throughout the execution? In more detail, we are interested to design a single MPC protocol which could tolerate up to TS corruptions if the network behaves in a synchronous fashion, or otherwise should tolerate TA corruptions if the network behaves in an asynchronous fashion, and where the parties are not aware what the underlying network is exactly. Okay? So such protocols we call as network agnostic MPC protocols, and the study of network agnostic MPC started with the wonderful work of Blom et al. And continued by the work of Deligios et al. And Bacco et al., who designed network agnostic MPC protocols with these bounds. So here TS and TA are the number of corruptions in the synchronous and asynchronous setting which you would like to tolerate. And they showed that this condition TA plus 2 TS less than N is also necessary. However, all these protocols provide cryptographic security, and we are interested in network agnostic protocols which provide you unconditional security. So let us start with network agnostic MPC with perfect security. And we assume that a function to be securely computed is represented by some arithmetic circuit over a finite field. And the goal will be to get a polynomial-based secret sharing scheme which could enable the parties to get a TS degree sharing of its value. So what I mean here is that assume for the moment that you have some secret sharing mechanism which allows a designated party or a dealer to pick a TS degree polynomial and distribute verifiably the points on its polynomial, which will result in a TS sharing of its input S. So if we have such a VSS protocol, then what we can do is we can evaluate the circuit using the standard secret shared circuit evaluation, where we start with the input gates and every party verifiably secret shares its input using a TS degree polynomial. And then we evaluate each gate in the circuit in topological order over secret shares. Okay, and once we have all the gates evaluated, and the function output is available in a secret shared fashion, you can robustly reconstruct it. So if we have such a polynomial-based VSS, then it will be having the linearity property, and that's why to evaluate the linear gates in this circuit, you don't have to interact, and the interaction is required only for evaluating the multiplication gates. But again, for evaluating the multiplication gates, you can deploy the standard Beaver's approach. So everything boils down to how do you generate secret shared Beaver triplets in a network agnostic setting. And for this, we use one of our earlier framework for unconditionally secure MPC, where we had shown that if you give me two gadgets, namely a polynomial-based verifiable secret sharing scheme and a Byzantine agreement protocol, then we can combine them in a black box way to generate secret shared Beaver triplets. Interestingly, we observed that this framework is applicable even in the network agnostic setting. So that means to generate the secret shared triplets, what we need here is a network agnostic VSS with perfect security and network agnostic Byzantine agreement with perfect security. And that's what we design in this work. Prior to our work, there was no network agnostic VSS with perfect security, and there was no network agnostic Byzantine agreement with perfect security. So I will first discuss what are the challenges that we face when we design a network agnostic BA with perfect security. So Byzantine agreement or fault tolerant distributed consensus is a very fundamental problem in distributed computing. And the scenario here is the following. We have a bunch of parties with some private inputs. Suppose the input could be to whether attack or not attack a kingdom. And a subset of these parties could be corrupt. And what we want here is a mechanism which enables all the honest parties to reach to a common outcome. So in the literature, the Byzantine agreement problem has been well studied, both in the synchronous as well as in the asynchronous network model. But the synchronous and asynchronous Byzantine agreement protocols with perfect security gives different guarantees. In more detail, the synchronous BA provides the validity and consistency, which ensures that the validity ensures that if all the honest parties start the protocol with the same input, then they will get that value as the output after a fixed time. Whereas the consistency guarantees that even if the honest parties start the protocol with different inputs, they will obtain a common output after a fixed time. And the parties will be knowing what exactly that fixed time is, after how much time they are going to obtain that output. Namely, the guarantees here are deterministic. Whereas if we go to the asynchronous BA protocols with perfect security, then we have this FLP impossibility result due to Fisher, Lynch, and Patterson, which rules out the possibility of deterministic consensus protocols in the asynchronous model. And that's why most of the asynchronous consensus protocols are randomized in nature, and they give us probabilistic guarantees. In more detail, the existing asynchronous BA protocols with perfect security gives you validity, which ensures that if all honest parties start the protocol with the same input, then eventually they will obtain that value as the output. But now the consistency is problematic in the sense that it ensures that if all honest parties start the protocol with a different input, then eventually honest parties will have a common output with probability 1. Okay. So this is like an almost surely liveness guarantee here. Interestingly, the optimal fault tolerance for both synchronous as well as asynchronous BA with perfect security is t less than n by 3. So one might be wondering that why can't we just take an asynchronous BA and run it in a synchronous network? We will get both the liveness, both the validity as well as the consistency guarantees, but that won't work because this asynchronous BA gives you almost surely liveness, whereas we expect a protocol which in a synchronous setting should give you the liveness without any probability. It should always terminate eventually. So that's a challenge. Whereas we cannot take a synchronous BA protocol and run it in an asynchronous environment, because even if a single expected message from an honest party gets arbitrarily delayed, the whole security breaks down. So these are the challenges that we have to overcome if we want to design a network agnostic BA with perfect security. We also have challenges if we want to design a network agnostic VSS with perfect security. So in a VSS, what we want is the following. We have a dealer party, designated dealer party, and its private input is some t degree polynomial, where t is the number of corruptions in the system. And what we want here is that at the end of the protocol, all honest parties should have a point on the dealer's polynomial, which will result in the t sharing of the dealer's t sharing of the constant term of the dealer's polynomial. And again, in the literature, we have both synchronous verifiable secret sharing as well as asynchronous verifiable secret sharing with perfect security, but they give us different guarantees. So if we consider the synchronous VSS, it guarantees correctness and commitment. So correctness means that if the dealer is honest, then after a fixed time or fixed number of rounds, all honest parties will have the shares on the dealer's polynomial. And the commitment guarantees that even if the dealer is corrupt, there is some well-defined t degree polynomial such that all honest parties have the shares on that well-defined polynomial and after a fixed number of rounds. On the other hand, asynchronous VSS also gives us a kind of correctness and commitment. The correctness guarantee here is that if the dealer is honest, then eventually all honest parties will have the shares on the dealer's polynomial. But now the commitment property is slightly weaker, because if the dealer is corrupt in an asynchronous network, it may not trigger the protocol in the first place, and the parties may not be obtaining any shares. So that's why the commitment guarantee for the asynchronous VSS is that t degree polynomial, such that eventually all honest parties will receive the shares on that well-defined polynomial. Interestingly, now the optimal resilience bounds for the synchronous and asynchronous VSS with perfect security are different. For the synchronous case, we could tolerate up to t less than n by 3 corruptions. On the other hand, in the asynchronous case, we could tolerate only up to 1/4 corruption. So of course, we cannot take any synchronous VSS and run it in an asynchronous environment, because even if a single expected message from an honest party gets arbitrarily delayed, the whole security breaks down. On the other hand, we cannot take any asynchronous VSS with perfect security and run it in a synchronous environment, because we could tolerate only up to 1/4 corruption, whereas we expect the VSS protocol to tolerate up to 1/3 corruption if the network behaves in a synchronous fashion. Moreover, we are interested in a VSS where the degree of the underlying sharing should be always TS, because when we are performing the shared circuit evaluation, we would write all the values during the circuit evaluation to be TS degree shared, because the parties won't be knowing how exactly the network is going to behave. So right from the beginning till end, we have to ensure that all the values should remain TS degree secret shared, even if the network is asynchronous. So that's a second level of challenge while designing a network agnostic VSS with perfect security. So what are our contributions for network agnostic MPC with perfect security? We solved the challenges associated with both BA as well as VSS. We designed the first network agnostic perfectly secure Byzantine agreement protocol with t less than n by 3 resilience, which gives us the synchronous validity and consistency guarantees if the network behaves in a synchronous fashion, or otherwise it gives us the asynchronous validity and asynchronous consistency guarantees if the network behaves in an asynchronous fashion. And on a very high level, we actually follow the framework that has been used by the Byzantine agreement protocol of Blum et al., where they have the primary path and the fallback path, but we have to modify each of the primitives to achieve perfect security, so that when we combine both the paths, we get all the security guarantees irrespective of the kind of network. For VSS, we designed a first network agnostic perfectly secure VSS tolerating 1/4 corruption in the asynchronous setting and up to 1/3 corruption in the synchronous setting, provided TS and TA satisfies this condition. And interestingly, it will be ensured that irrespective of the network type, the degree of the sharing will be always TS, because as I said, this is very crucial when you are performing the shared circuit evaluation. So I won't be going into the details of the perfect VSS, rather I will list down some of the very nice open questions which are there in this domain. So one obvious question is to improve the computation and communication cost of our network agnostic VSS and MPC. Right now, the communication cost is n cube for sharing, n cube for per secret shared value, and the cost for evaluating one multiplication gate is this much. Till last year, a very interesting question was whether this condition 3TS plus TA less than n is necessary for designing any network agnostic MPC with perfect security. We were thinking that this condition is indeed necessary, but we were unable to prove the optimality of this condition. But in a recent follow-up work by Patel and Patra, they have shown that there is optimal resilience conditions for network agnostic perfect security is different. They have shown that this is the optimal resilience condition. But unfortunately, their protocol involves exponential computation cost. So it's a very challenging open problem to design a network agnostic VSS and MPC with perfect security with this optimal resilience bound and polynomial computation cost. So I will next move to network agnostic MPC with statistical security. And again, our approach was to kind of look for these two primitives, network agnostic VSS and network agnostic Byzantine agreement. But now we will be settling with statistical security, because if we have both these gadgets, then we can combine them to generate Beaver triplets. For getting the Byzantine agreement with statistical security, we don't have to work too much, because we could take the network agnostic BA of Bloom et al. What we have to do is we have to just replace the cryptographic PKI with an unconditionally secure PKI, namely the pseudo signatures which are required for signing the messages in the agreement protocol. But now the challenge comes while designing a polynomial based VSS with statistical security and with the condition 2TS plus TA less than n. And the main challenge is if we are in a setting where the dealer is corrupt, then we could only wait for a subset of n minus TS parties to confirm that they have received their shares, because we cannot wait for the confirmation from all the n parties. But now this subset of n minus TS parties do not have sufficiently many honest parties in a synchronous network to define a well-defined TS sharing. And that's a major challenge that we have to overcome if we want to design a polynomial-based secret sharing with statistical security. So to get away with this problem, what we instead do is we actually design VSS based on replicated secret sharing, where the idea is that the dealer should generate additive shares for its secret, and each share should be distributed to a distinct group of size n minus TS. And the idea here is that since there will be always one subset of size n minus TS consisting of only honest parties, the adversary won't be having any knowledge about the share of that group, and that will ensure the privacy of the dealer's value. However, for robust reconstruction, we also need to ensure that within each group GI, there should be a subset of core parties WI of this much size, n minus TS minus TA, who have publicly confirmed that within that group they have received a common value as a share, and they should have signed that common value for each other through IC signature, so that later at the time of reconstruction, the core members can open the supposedly common value for each group signed by each other. And if we have a core group of size n minus TS minus TA within each group, that will ensure that there is always one honest party in that core group irrespective of the network type. But now, ensuring this core group of size n minus TS minus TA within each group of size n minus TS brings in additional challenges, because it looks very non-intuitive that how within each group you will wait for a subset of n minus TS minus TA parties to confirm that they have received the same value, because we could only wait for a subset of size n minus 2 TS to confirm that they have received the same value within each group. And the second challenge that we have to overcome here is that we need to ensure that this core group WI should be same for each group GI for different dealers to ensure the homomorphic property. Because if we have two different dealers, say D1 and D2, and D1 and D2 are secret sharing values S and S prime, then we require that the core group W1 for group G1 for the first dealer and the core group W1 for the second dealer should be same. Then only we could linearly combine any, we could linearly compute any function, any linear function of the secret shared by the two different dealers. But again, maintaining the same common cores across multiple dealers, and that too in a network agnostic setting, brings in lot of additional challenges. So in the paper, we have shown that how exactly we deal with both these challenges. So I won't go into the technical details, but rather I will list down the problems, open problems, which are left in this domain. So as you can see that since we are doing the replicated secret sharing and performing computation over all subsets of size n minus ts, the exponential and the communication cost will be exponential in the number of protocol participants. So making it polynomial is really a challenging open problem. And finally, I am going to talk now in detail about the network agnostic MPC with cryptographic security. I will stress that we already have network agnostic MPC with cryptographic security, but we are interested, but they are based on public key primitives or garbled circuits. We are interested to design a protocol based on verifiable secret sharing. And again, the idea will be that generate secret shared beaver triplets, for which we will now hunting for network agnostic BA with cryptographic security and network agnostic VSS with cryptographic security. For network agnostic BA, we don't have to do anything because we already have network agnostic BA with cryptographic security. So what is left is to design a network agnostic VSS with cryptographic security. So let me go into the details of what exactly is a verifiable secret sharing scheme. So if we consider the traditional polynomial based secret sharing, namely the sum is secret sharing, then there we have a dealer with some private input S, and we have a set of parties. And what we want the dealer to do is to pick a t degree polynomial and distribute points, distinct points on this t degree polynomial to distinct parties. And this will ensure that even if there is a subset of up to t parties, it doesn't learn anything about the dealer's secret S. But in this polynomial based secret sharing, we are assuming that the dealer is going to behave correctly. It will indeed pick a t degree polynomial and distribute points on a t degree polynomial. What if the dealer behaves maliciously? Then it may not pick a t degree polynomial for distributing the shares. It may distribute garbage to the shareholders. So what we require here is a verification mechanism on top of this dealer's distribution, which can enable the parties to verify that they have indeed received shares on a well-defined t degree polynomial. And this will happen through some protocol which we call as a sharing phase protocol. Now what we expect is that later during the reconstruction phase, if the parties take their shares from the sharing phase and exchange shares, then they are going to robustly reconstruct back a common value S prime. So any VSS scheme consists of two protocols, one for the sharing phase and one for the reconstruction phase. And on a very high level, the goal here is to enable the dealer to verifiably secret share its input S. We expect various security guarantees from any VSS protocol. We expect the protocol to give us privacy guarantee, which ensures that if the dealer is honest, then till the end of the sharing phase, nothing about the dealer's input is revealed, even during this verification mechanism. We expect a correctness property, which guarantees that later during the reconstruction phase, if the parties exchange their shares, then they should be able to reconstruct only the dealer's input if dealer was honest throughout the protocol execution. We also require the liveness or the termination guarantee, which ensures that both the sharing phase and the reconstruction phase should get over. And we also require the commitment property, which ensures that even if the dealer is potentially corrupt, at the end of the sharing phase, there is some well-defined value, say S star, and the same S star or the committed value should be later robustly reconstructed, even if up to t parties misbehave during the reconstruction phase. So again, in the literature, we have VSS with cryptographic security, both for the synchronous as well as in the asynchronous network. If we take the synchronous network, then the synchronous verifiable secret sharing schemes could tolerate up to n by 2 corruptions, whereas the asynchronous verifiable secret sharing schemes could tolerate up to 1/3 corruptions. So it's easy to see that if I run a synchronous VSS in an asynchronous environment, the security will completely break down even if a single message from the honest party gets delayed. Whereas I can take an asynchronous VSS and run it in a synchronous environment, but I could tolerate only up to 1/3 corruption. So now the goal here is to design a VSS irrespective of the behavior of the underlying network, which should tolerate up to n/2 corruption or n/3 corruptions respectively in the synchronous and asynchronous network, and where the degree of the underlying sharing is always TS. So to design our network agnostic VSS, we use commitment scheme. So in a commitment scheme, we have a committer and a verifier. Committer has a message M which it would like to commit to the verifier through some commit protocol. And later during the later, if the verifier wants, it can ask the committer to open the committed value by providing the opening information, and the verifier can verify whether the opened value is indeed correct or not, and accordingly either accepts it or rejects it. This happens through an opening phase protocol. Now we expect two security properties from any commitment scheme, the hiding and the binding property. The hiding property demands that if the verifier is corrupt, then during the commit phase, it doesn't learn anything about the committed input, whereas the binding property ensures that if the committer is corrupt and it reveals, opens a different value M prime than what it has committed earlier, then it should get rejected. In our scheme, we use the Pedersen's commitment scheme based on the discrete log problem, and this Pedersen's commitment scheme provides us a very nice homomorphic property which guarantees that if you have two committed values M1 and M2, and if you want to compute a linear function over these inputs M1 and M2, then even without knowing the inputs M1 and M2, you could compute homomorphically a commitment of the values M1, commitment of the output of this function G of M1, M2. So our network agnostic VSS uses ideas from existing synchronous VSS and asynchronous VSS. So let me quickly go through the classical synchronous VSS of Pedersen based on the Pedersen's commitment scheme. And this could tolerate up to n/2 corruptions. So what the dealer does is the following. If it has the input S, then it secret shares the input S through some secret sharing by picking a t-degree polynomial and distributing the distinct shares to the shareholders. But now it also has to provide a proof that it has distributed shares lying on a t-degree polynomial. To do that, what the dealer does, it broadcasts or makes public the commitment of the coefficients of this sharing polynomial. And now every party, PI, upon receiving its share can homomorphically verify whether the share indeed lies on the t-degree polynomial which has been publicly committed by the dealer. If the check doesn't pass, then it publicly accuses the dealer. And if you have more than t accusations against the dealer, then you definitely know that the dealer is corrupt. But if there are up to t accusations, you are not sure whether the dealer is honest or corrupt, so you cannot discard the dealer. Instead, you ask the dealer to publicly resolve the disputes, in the sense that you ask the dealer to make public the shares of such complaining parties. And now again, you have to verify whether the shares which have been made public on behalf of the complaining parties are indeed lying on the polynomial committed by the dealer or not. So this simple VSS protocol ensures that if the dealer is not discarded, then at the end of the sharing phase, the shares of all honest parties indeed lie on this committed univariate polynomial. However, this simple protocol won't work in the asynchronous setting, because in the asynchronous setting, what can happen is that a corrupt dealer could give the shares only to a subset of n minus t parties, and the entire verification passes. But in the process, up to t honest parties may be left out from obtaining their shares. And the subset of n minus t parties who have verified their shares have no information about the shares of the left out parties. So that's why traditionally, for designing asynchronous VSS, we have to use what we call as two-dimensional secret sharing based on the bivariate polynomials, where every shareholder should have some information about the shares of the other parties. So in more detail, this asynchronous VSS schemes could tolerate up to 1/3 corruptions. And here, the way dealer shares its secret is as follows. So on having the input S, it hides the secret S in a symmetric bivariate polynomial f of xy, where traditionally the degree of this bivariate polynomial is t in both the dimensions. And then what the dealer does is it evaluates this bivariate polynomial at n distinct values of y. We call this small f polynomials as the row polynomials. So we will have n row polynomials. Each of them is a t degree polynomial in x. And each row polynomial is distributed as a share to respective shareholders. Now, to enable the parties verify that indeed their shares or the row polynomials lying on a well-defined bivariate polynomial, what the dealer does is it commits each of these row polynomials publicly. So this commitment matrix will be publicly available. Now, before going ahead, notice that if we consider distinct points on this bivariate polynomial f of xy and view this matrix of n cross n values, then what is happening here is that the ith party will have the ith row here of this matrix through its row polynomial, because the ith row here is nothing but n distinct points on its row polynomial fi of x. And in the same way, the jth party will be having the jth column here. But because of the symmetric nature of the bivariate polynomial, what's guaranteed here is that there is every pair of parties pi and pj has one common point. And that's a property which this bivariate-based VSS exploits. So to make progress, what the parties do is, as and when a party receives its share, namely the row polynomial, it verifies again homomorphically whether the row polynomial that it has received lies on the bivariate polynomial which has been committed by the dealer. And if the check passes, then it publicly makes this indication to everyone by broadcasting an OK message that it has received its row polynomial and it indeed lies on the bivariate polynomial committed by the dealer. Now what the dealer does is it looks for a bunch of core parties of size n minus t who have publicly confirmed that they have indeed received their respective row polynomials and verified that they lie on the bivariate polynomial committed by the dealer. Because we cannot wait for a confirmation of all the n parties that they have received their row polynomials, because the weight may turn out to be an endless weight. And now once dealer identifies this core set of parties, it publicly announces the identity of this core set, indicating that it has committed its bivariate polynomial by distributing the shares to these core members. But now what can happen is that there could be up to t honest parties who might be left out. They are not the part of this core set, because they have not received any shares or any row polynomial from the dealer. But now what we can, the observation that we can use here is that each of these core members have got a distinct point on the supposed row polynomial of these non-core members. Because remember that every core member has its row polynomial here, and every non-core member, if it has missed out its polynomial being received from the dealer, then the core member can help it by providing that one common point to the non-core member. So that's what happens. Every core member passes on the supposedly common point on the row polynomials of the non-core members who could hand over wrong points. But again, thanks to this publicly available commitments, these non-core members could verify whether the points received from the core parties are right or not by verifying them against the commitments. And since this core is of size n minus t, it will have honest majority. So that's why majority of the points which will be coming here will be from the honest parties eventually. And that's why these non-core members will have sufficiently many points to recover back their row polynomials. So this is the structure of any existing asynchronous VSS scheme. So now how do we combine these ideas for our network agnostic VSS? So we are interested to design a network agnostic VSS which should work irrespective of whether the network behaves in a synchronous fashion or in an asynchronous fashion. And our bounds are this. So TS is less than n by 2, TA is less than n by 3, and the condition TA plus 2TS less than n. Now again, since we don't know how the network is going to behave, we have to follow the approach of bivariate-based VSS, because what if the network behaves in an asynchronous fashion, then we have to use the two-dimensional secret sharing. So with that insight, what we do is we ask the dealer to pick a symmetric bivariate polynomial of degree TS in both the variables, and where the secret is hidden in the constant term of this bivariate polynomial. and distribute the distinct row polynomials to each shareholder. And then to enable the parties verify that their shares are lying on a well-defined TS degree bivariate polynomial, we ask the dealer to make public the commitments of the row polynomial. Now this broadcast or this public announcement of the commitment happens through a network agnostic broadcast protocol, and here TBC denotes the time which this network agnostic broadcast protocol will take to deliver its outcome in a synchronous network. Now, as and when a party receives its row polynomial, it verifies it against the publicly committed bivariate polynomial and announces whether it has received its row polynomial lying on the bivariate polynomial committed by the dealer. And now, again, the goal of the dealer will be to identify a core set of size n minus ts who have publicly confirmed the receipt of their row polynomials. Once dealer makes public the identity of the core set, what we have to do is we have to identify whether indeed dealer has made public the core set or not. Because what can happen now is that all this broadcast, the announcements of the commitment, the announcements of the OK messages, the announcements of the core set happens through a network agnostic broadcast. And we don't know whether the network is synchronous and asynchronous. So it might happen that some honest parties have received and verified the core sets, whereas other honest parties have not received the core set and not verified them. So what we do is, at local time 3t, which is the time at which an honest dealer should have indeed made public the core set and get it verified in a synchronous network, the parties run an instance of a network agnostic consensus here to check whether dealer has indeed made public a well-defined core set or not. Okay. And this network agnostic BA could have two outputs. Some honest parties might have seen the core set, some honest parties may not have seen the core set, but irrespective of that, it will ensure that every honest party come to a common decision, whether at least one honest party has seen the core set or not. So there could be two possible outcomes of this network agnostic BA, whether the core set has been announced or whether the core set has not been announced. And depending upon that, we have to take different actions. So let us first take the case when at least one honest party has seen the core set at the designated time 3TBC. So we have now the core set and the non-core set, and one may hope that what we ask the core members to transfer the common points on the row polynomials of the non-core members, so that the non-core members also get their row polynomials. But unfortunately, that idea won't work now. This is because it depends on the type of the underlying network. If network is behaving in an asynchronous fashion, then this process of transferring the common points from the core members to non-core member will work, because you will have TS plus one honest parties in core set if the network is asynchronous. But if the network is synchronous and say the dealer is corrupt, then you do not have sufficiently many honest parties who could transfer their common points to this non-core. So that's why this transfer process won't work, and we are stuck here. But what the observation we utilized here is that the dealer is still online. The sharing phase is not yet over. So why can't we ask the dealer to come and help these non-core members to get their row polynomials? Okay, but now a corrupt dealer actually could cheat. So we have to be very careful. So what we ask the dealer to do is, on behalf of each of these non-core members, we ask the dealer to reshare the shares of these non-core members through a TA degree polynomial, not through a TS degree polynomial. And this is the main crux of the protocol. One may observe that, one may think that if we ask the dealer to reshare the shares of this non-core member through a TA degree polynomial, that will violate the privacy, because there could be up to TS corruptions in the system. But that's not going to be the case. This is because if the network is synchronous and if the dealer is honest, then all the honest parties are on code. Then anyway we have TA corruptions in the system. So it's again sufficient that the shares of these non-core members are reshared through a TA degree polynomial. So asking the dealer to reshare the shares of these non-core members through a TA degree polynomial is not going to violate the privacy. So we ask the dealer to now follow the Pedersen's univariate-based commitment style VSS to reshare the shares of these non-core members by distributing the shares on a TA degree polynomial on behalf of these non-core members. But now we also need to ensure that this dealer should not cheat and reshare incorrect shares on behalf of these non-core members. But that is very easy to verify, because what we will now ask the dealer to do is, we will ask the dealer to again commit to the coefficients of this new resharing polynomials, and we can compare the constant terms which have been committed in this new commitments with the commitments which it has already made public in the earlier stage, and they should be same, and then only we proceed. And now what we have to just do is, we have to ensure that for each of these new TA degree polynomials, we identify a subset of n minus TS parties who have received the shares of this new TA degree polynomials. And now, irrespective of whether the network is synchronous or asynchronous, this subset of size n minus TS will have sufficiently many honest parties, namely TA plus 1 honest parties, who could transfer the common points on the row polynomials of these non-core members. And that will ensure that these non-core members also get their shares lying on the bivariate polynomial which has been committed by the dealer earlier. The other case could be that no honest party receives a core set at the end of local time 3 TBC. So that could have two implications. Either the network is synchronous, but the dealer has behaved in a corrupted way by not distributing shares in time, and the other implication could be that the network itself could be asynchronous. So in this case, the idea here will be not to let the dealer again reshare its secret from the input, from the beginning, but rather we simply fall back, in the sense that we use the steps of an asynchronous VSS, but we are not going to ask the dealer to again pick a new bivariate polynomial and distribute shares, etc., etc. Let it continue with whatever data it has already started with. It just has to now pick a core of size n minus TA. That means it has to wait for a confirmation of subset of n minus TA parties who should come up and say that they have received their row polynomials lying on the bivariate which the dealer has committed in public. And now, this new core of size n minus TA, if it is found, it will have sufficiently many honest parties, even if the network is synchronous. It will have at least TS plus 1 honest parties who could transfer the common points on the supposedly row polynomials of the non-core members who are left out, and that will ensure that even the non-core members will get their row polynomials. So that's the idea behind our network agnostic VSS. So what are the open problems in this avenue? So of late, people have started using a packed secret sharing, where instead of one value, you pack multiple values in a single bivariate polynomial. We have not explored that idea. So it's interesting to see whether we can design network agnostic VSS with packed secret sharing. Since we are in the cryptographic setting, why can't we utilize some kind of trusted setup to boost the communication cost? And what are the other ways to improve the communication cost in general? So these are some of the nice questions in this domain, and that's all from my side.
Hello.
Yeah.
Nice talk. Thanks for the presentation. So the VSS part you talked about, so I mean, it's interactive VSS, right? That you talked about mostly.
The first two VSS were introductory. To the later part.
Sorry, interactive I meant.
Interactive. Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
if you have something like non-interactive VSS, like is it already network agnostic?
So I'm not sure how you can design a non-interactive VSS in a network agnostic setting, because anyway, if the network is asynchronous, you are not guaranteed that everyone would have received the shares. So you can only get confirmation that a subset of the parties have received the shares, and then there has to be an interaction so that the parties who have received the shares could help the other parties who have not received the shares to get their shares.
I mean, for asynchronous case, I think it's possible, because you can have public verifiability where anyone can verify outside, like encrypt and proof kind of techniques, right?
Okay. I'm not sure whether anything of that sort is there in the asynchronous setting.
Okay, all right.
And of course, that means if nothing is there in asynchronous setting, you can't have that kind of thing in network agnostic.
I mean, I thought that it might work in asynchronous setting, because it's realizes on zero knowledge proof instead of complaining techniques.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
But again, if a party has not received a share, then you have to do something with that party, right? So it has a proof that it has not received a share.
Right.
That doesn't complete the sharing. right? So, so there has to be some kind of interaction so that either you implicate the dealer for a corrupt behavior or you somehow enable that party who has not got its share to get its share. So I'm not sure whether you can have a completely non-interactive solution here.
I see. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Um, if I understood correctly, it seemed like the information theoretic protocols had exponential runtime.
Yes,
So,
both the perfect as well as the statistical.
so in that case, do the lower bounds actually hold in the sense that it seems like in an asynchronous network, the messages of all honest parties will eventually be delivered in polynomial time, right? So, and like I could just, the parties could wait for exponential time and
Exponential time, no? So, what do you mean by exponential time in this context? It's eventually going to be delivered. When that eventual event is going to happen, you don't know. So there is no such notion of exponential time or exponential number of rounds here.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like if I receive, eventually you will also receive. But between me receiving and you receiving, what will be the gap? We have absolutely no knowledge, no control.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for the great talk. So I had one small question. In the computational setting, is there a specific bottleneck that requires you to use homomorphic commitments?
Yeah, I could see why you were asking the question there. Yeah, because we were actually aiming to design a complete secret sharing where everyone should have the share. So the only approach that we could think of is that use the homomorphic property to verify the degree of the bivariate polynomial which has been committed. I don't think that if you have a symmetric key-based commitment, how you get it verified. Because if you don't have a verification mechanism where you get verified that the commitments actually define a structure, say a t-degree polynomial or a bivariate polynomial, then the parties who are left out, who are not in core, how they are going to get their shares verified. So that was the main bottleneck actually.
Okay. So I was thinking maybe the place where you reshare it, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to prove the equivalence of
That is also there. That is of course also that's another place exactly, where we need the homomorphic property. That the earlier committed thing and the new committed thing, they're constant terms. The earlier committed polynomial and the new committed polynomial, their constant terms are same. So we need to verify that as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Arpita has a question.
The bound for the computational setting is right?
Yes.
It has been proven.
Yes. It is bound for MPC as well, for cryptographic MPC as well.
Okay. And could you use the recent ACSs that
Yeah, so
these
we
people
have not
proposed,
explored that direction. Yes, we have not explored that.
but potentially you can
Yes.
use that in
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
I mean, following up on the
Yes,
question. and
yes,
using symmetry.
exactly.
Okay, then I guess this concludes the session. We have another gift.
We'll meet after a refreshment break at 11:40.
Okay, let's thank the speakers once more. Okay, thank you.
can keep it inside. Okay. Not sure. Should I wait? Okay.
Hello. So yeah, let's start the next session. The title of the talk is Honest Majority God MPC with order of depth C rounds and low online communication. The talk will be given by Amit Agarwal. He's a PhD candidate from IISc.
Thanks. Today I will talk about this work on honest majority guaranteed output delivery MPC with order depth C rounds and low online communication. And this is joint work with my collaborators Alexander Benstock, Ivan Damgard, and Daniel Escudero. So hopefully by now we all know what MPC is, so I'll skip this part. The setting that we consider is n parties and computationally unbounded adversary corrupting threshold T many parties, where n is greater than 2t plus 1, also known as honest majority assumption. We assume secure authenticated point-to-point channels between every pair of parties and public broadcast channel. We are in the synchronous setting, and we want guaranteed output delivery, which means every honest party should output the final value, and we require statistical security to hold in this setting. So existing works in this regime can be divided into two broad categories. So one category is where we have low communication but high rounds, the state of the art here being the work by Goel et al. What low means is that the communication complexity here, the part of communication complexity which depends on the circuit size, scales linearly in the number of parties. High rounds means that the number of rounds in the worst case can be proportional to n square, when n is the number of parties. The other category is where we have high communication and low rounds, the state of the art being the work by Chaudhary and Patra. So here, the high communication means that the part of communication which depends on the circuit size can scale proportional to n power 4. And low rounds means that the number of rounds is independent of the number of parties. So a natural question is, can we get the best of both categories? Can we get low communication and low rounds? And the work by Abraham et al. Answered this question positively for the t less than n over 3 case. And in this work, we are interested in the t less than n over 2 setting. So our result is the following. So for n greater than 2t, we show that there exists a statistically secure MPC protocol for arbitrary arithmetic circuit C over field size proportional to 2 power kappa, where kappa is the statistical security parameter. Here is how our costs look like. So for the offline phase, we have constant rounds and communication, which is C times n cube, where C is the circuit size, both over P2P and broadcast. And in the online phase, we have communication, which is rounds, which is proportional to the depth of the circuit, and communication, which is C times N plus depth of C times N cube over P2P and broadcast. By the way, this communication ignores additive terms which are polynomial in N and independent of the circuit size. So let's see what the high-level flow looks like. So usually, what you in the statistical setting, you start with an object called information checking signature, also known as IISc, and you use this to construct a verifiable secret sharing scheme, and then this is used to construct an MPC protocol. So this is what the usual flow looks like. We don't proceed with this usual flow. What we do is we use IC signatures to construct an object called detectable secret sharing, and we'll see what this is in the next few slides. And then we use this to get our MPC protocol. In fact, what we'll do is we'll use a batched form of IC signatures, which means that this signature would be over many secrets. And what we'll use is a packed, batched, and masked detectable secret sharing scheme, which means that each pack will contain multiple secrets, and we'll operate over a batch of multiple such packs. And masked detector will mean that whenever if a cheating is detected, then we detect omega n corrupt parties and kick them out. We'll see what these are in more detail in the next few slides. Okay, so let's start with our first ingredient, which is information theoretic signatures, also known as IISc. So you, at a high level, you can think of this as an information theoretic analog of a commitment or a signature scheme. So here you have a dealer which has some secret S, and you have two other parties known as intermediary and the receiver. In the signing phase, these parties interact, and the intermediary ends up with the secret S along with an IC signature. And the receiver ends up with some kind of verification information. Later in the reveal phase, the intermediary can reveal the secret S along with the IC signature, and the receiver either outputs accept or reject. So there are some guarantees that is required out of such an IC6 scheme. So if all three parties, dealer, intermediary, and receiver, are honest, then the secret S that the dealer started with will always be accepted in the reveal phase. If the dealer is corrupt, other two parties are honest, then we have the guarantee that at the end of the signing phase, there will be a unique secret S prime that will be accepted in the reveal phase, except with some negligible probability. Then if the intermediary is corrupt, other two parties are honest, then we have the guarantee that the output of the receiver will be reject for all secrets S prime, which is not equal to the original secret S, except with some negligible probability. Lastly, if the receiver is corrupt, other two parties are honest, then we have the guarantee that the receiver will have no information about the secret S at the end of the sharing phase. So the work of Patra and Rangan from 2010 proposes an extension to this basic IC signature scheme, and the extension is in two different dimensions. First of all, instead of having a single secret, we have multiple secrets, S1 up till Sm. And instead of having a single receiver, we have n different receivers, out of which the adversary can control a threshold T on many receivers. And they show that they construct a protocol for this extended setting. So if you assume that you have m secrets and think of m as some order n, where n is the number of parties, and the threshold T also as order n, then you have the following costs. So for the signing phase, you have order n communication, both over P2P and broadcast, and order 1 round. And in the reveal phase also, you have the same costs. Naively, if you do this without any optimizations, you would get order n square communication over P2P and broadcast. So what Patra and Rangan show is that you can make this cost equal to the cost of a single secret. In our work, we provide a UC secure formulation of this Patra-Rangan scheme. These IC signatures have some nice homomorphic properties. So if you have two secrets, S1 and S2, along with their IC signatures, then the intermediary and receiver can add up their respective components of IC signatures to get a signature on the sum of the two secrets. You can also take a secret and multiply it with the public value u. Think of S and U as vectors of multiple secrets over here. So you can multiply these and get an IC signatures over the product of these values. S is secret and U is public. So you might notice that the locks here have increased in size. What that means is that under the hood, what is happening is that these locks are actually polynomials. So for a secret S, which is a vector of length m, the lock is basically a polynomial of degree t plus m minus 1, where t is the threshold of corruption and m is the length of vector S. Whereas the lock of the vector u is a degree m minus 1 polynomial. So when you multiply these two things, you get a lock which is represented by degree t plus 2 times m minus 1 polynomial. Okay, so now we'll see how we can use this object, this IC signature, to construct what we call packed, batched, and mass detectable secret sharing. Before going into that, let's see what the standard verifiable secret sharing scheme is. So standard verifiable secret sharing extends the concept of secret sharing to the malicious setting, where the dealer, adversary can corrupt the dealer and some threshold T of the parties. So in the sharing phase, the dealer shares the secret S to n parties, and each party ends up with a share Si. In the reconstruction phase, the parties can announce their shares to reconstruct the secret. So in a standard verifiable secret sharing scheme, the properties that you want is the following. So you want privacy to hold, which means that if the dealer is honest, then the view of the adversary which corrupts at most T parties is independent of the secret S at the end of the sharing phase. Correctness says that if the dealer is honest, then all honest parties will output the secret S at the end of reconstruction phase. And binding says that if the dealer is corrupt, then the joint view of the honest parties at the end of the sharing phase will define some unique value S prime. And this is the value that will be reconstructed at the end of the reconstruction phase. Now, detectable secret sharing, which was proposed in this prior work by Abraham et al., relaxes the notion of verifiable secret sharing scheme by relaxing the reconstruction property, where we say that either the reconstruction succeeds or you end up identifying omega n corrupt parties. So going back and forth between VSS and DSS, you can see that the difference is just in the relaxation of the reconstruction phase, where you either reconstruct or you identify omega n corrupt parties in the DSS scheme. Okay, so now we'll try to construct this kind of DSS scheme, but before that, let's look at how we normally construct a standard VSS scheme. So this is done using a bivariate secret sharing scheme along with IC signatures. And this is from prior work from Kramer et al. From 1999. So let's say you have a dealer with secret S, and you have n parties whom the secret has to be secret shared. So the dealer starts by defining a random bivariate polynomial f in two variables, x and y, with degree t in each variable, and embeds the secret S at the 0, 0 coordinate. Such a bivariate polynomial can be visualized as a two-dimensional matrix of the evaluation points. So what happens is the dealer takes the ith row and the ith column in this two-dimensional matrix and sends it to the ith party. Not just this, it also, so you can think of the blue row as a share and the green column as a sub-share or some kind of authentication information that would be used later. So in addition to this, the dealer additionally appends an IC signature on each of the entries in this row and column. So this is what the dealer does. So now once this is done, here is the view of the ith party. So the ith party is holding a row and a column in this two-dimensional matrix along with the IC signatures on them. And it will perform some sanity checks on this row and column. We don't need to go into the details of what these sanity checks are, which is why I've blurred them in gray. And then if the sanity checks pass, it proceeds to the next phase. So in the next phase, what it does is, this ith party takes its green column and takes each entry of this green column and provides an IC signature on each entry towards the respective party. So for example, it takes the first entry of the green column and signs it towards the first party, and so on. And now these signatures are represented using green locks. So this is a second level of IC signature that we are invoking. So once this is done, on the green column, you have two IC signatures. One is represented by the purple lock, and which was by the dealer, and the other is by the green lock, which is by the ith party. So once every party does this, every cell in this matrix has two IC signatures on top of it, the purple one and the green one. And then each party performs some more checks on its row and column. Again, the details of these checks are not very important, except the fact that at the end, what happens is the party either aborts or outputs its row, blue row, as the share. So, and this concludes the sharing phase. In the reconstruction phase, the parties invoke sig.reveal on each cell in this blue row. And then all the parties check whether the blue row defines a degree T polynomial and the signature revelation is accepting. If so, parties interpolate the bivariate polynomial using all the valid blue rows. And the cost of this VSS scheme is basically on each entry of this matrix, you are invoking an IC signature. So you are doing order n square signature signing and revelation, both for sharing and reconstruction phase. And if you take a standard ICSig without any optimizations, which has order n cost, communication cost, and order 1 round, then you get order n cube cost, communication cost, and order 1 rounds. So the first optimization is you can just, instead of sharing a single secret, you can share m many secrets in parallel. So the dealer has m secrets, and think of m as order n. And now you will do order n square invocations of signature signing and revelation, but on a vector of length m. And by using the Patra-Rangan optimized signature scheme that I outlined earlier, which has the same cost as that of a single secret, you end up with a VSS scheme which has the same cost, but now order n cube cost and order 1 round, but now for sharing order n many secrets. The second optimization is, instead of sharing single, instead of using each SI being a field element, you can have each SI be a vector of L many field elements. And to do this, you will use packed secret sharing. So normally, the dealer samples a bivariate polynomial where it embeds the secret SI into the 0th coordinate. Instead of doing this, the dealer samples a bivariate polynomial where the degree in variable x is higher. It's t plus L minus 1, where L is the length of the vector that secret vector that it wants to embed. Now the problem is that since the degree in variable x has increased from t to t plus L minus 1, reconstruction might fail. And here is where the relaxation to the detectable secret sharing comes into the picture. And the relaxation, so what happens is, now in the reconstruction phase, we are no longer guaranteed that the interpolation will always succeed because the degree in variable x has increased to t plus L minus 1, but we have only t plus 1 honest parties. So what we do is this modified reconstruction phase where we select all the valid blue rows that we get, let that set be S. And if the size of this set is large enough, which means it's larger than t plus L minus 1, we can do the interpolation. And if this is not true, then we output the complement of this set as the set of corrupt parties and abort. Now, this ensures that you will at least identify t minus L plus 2 parties as corrupt. And if you set your t and L parameters appropriately as functions of n, which is the number of parties, then you are ensured that you'll always identify omega n corrupt parties. So once you do this optimization, here is the final DSS metric. So your delay is sharing m's secret vectors, where each vector is of length L. And think of everything T, the threshold T, length L, and M as order n. So the sharing phase has cost order n cube communication and order 1 rounds. And reconstruction phase also has the same cost. So now we are essentially sharing order n square secrets at the cost of order n cube communication and order 1 rounds. And in case the reconstruction fails, you identify omega n corrupt parties. Again, this DSS scheme has some nice homomorphic properties. So let's say you are secret sharing m vectors each of length L, and you denote this by double bracket S. So given two such sharings, SA and SP, you can compute a sharing of the sum of those two values. And you can do multiplication by a public constant. So if S is a secret and U is a public vector, then you can do a pointwise multiplication to derive the sharing of the product of these values. Again, the star indicates here that the degree has increased. Okay, so now I'll go into the final MPC protocol. So we'll use this DSS scheme and plug it into our MPC protocol. For the MPC, we use the TurboPack MPC protocol, which is designed for operating over packed secrets. So the high-level idea is the following. For every wire, excluding the output wire of addition gates, you have this random mask Ri. And the output wires of addition gates, the mask of the output wires of addition gates will be implicitly set to the sum of the mask of its input wires. And for every wire Wi with value Vi, parties will, during computation of the circuit, will learn the masked value Vi tilde, where Vi tilde is nothing but the original value Vi minus Ri. And we'll group the input wires and output wires of multiplication gates in each layer and use packed secret sharing to perform a SIMD-like computation. And these groups would be of size order n square. So now in the offline phase, what we need to do is we need to prepare these sharings, which is R copied n square many times. Apart from this, we need to prepare a sharing of R along with a standard VSS sharing of R. We also need to prepare multiplication triples, these packed multiplication triples. So for the first step, we have cost C times N cube over P2P broadcast. And this is done by extending the Damgard-Nielsen randomness generation protocol using our DSS scheme. For the second step, we also get C times N cube communication over P2P broadcast. For the third step, we extend the Chaudhary-Patra triple generation protocol to work with our DSS scheme. And for this, we get C times N square communication over P2P broadcast. In the online phase, for every input wire, each party broadcasts a masked version of the group of input wires that it owns. And for every layer, we invoke a DSS reconstruct procedure for every group of multiplication gates. And for every group of output gates, we invoke DSS reconstruct procedure. And in case we abort at any time, we kick out a corrupt set of parties. Again, note that we always kick out omega n corrupt parties. And if we set the parameters appropriately, it ensures that after we kick out, we do one set of abort. Then we kick out enough parties so that we lower our threshold to the n over 3 setting. And then we can proceed with the prior work, which solves this problem for the n over 3 setting. And so for the first step, we have C times N communication over P2P broadcast. For the second step, we have C times N plus depth of C times N cube communication. For the third step, again, we have C times N communication. For the last step, we have C times N plus number of input wires times N cube communication over P2P broadcast. And this concludes our result. Thanks.
Questions?
if we use cryptography, do you think the broadcast cost will improve? Right now it's circuit dependent.
Yes, yes. So I think if you use cryptography, you can design much better VSS and also probably DSS schemes. So yes, so we did not, in this work, we did not try to consciously optimize the broadcast cost, but I'm definitely sure you can improve it. Even without cryptography, I think there's room for improvement. Because what we are doing is we are not using these optimizations of doing parallel broadcast, which have been exploited in these earlier works by Abraham et al. So probably you can use some of those optimizations.
Any other questions?
Do you use fully homomorphic encryption as well?
No, we are in the information theoretic setting, so no cryptography.
Okay. So let's thanks the speaker again.
Thanks.
Okay. So the next talk is about multi-key homomorphic secret sharing by Aditya. He's a PhD candidate from Johns Hopkins University.
Okay, thanks. Hello everyone. I'll be talking about multi-key homomorphic secret sharing. This is joint work with Jofa, Lali, Sasha, and Abhishek. So what is homomorphic secret sharing? In homomorphic secret sharing, there are two parties, say Alice and Bob, and they receive a correlated setup consisting of a common public key and private evaluation keys. Now, using their public keys, they can encrypt their inputs and simultaneously send each other the ciphertexts. And now, given some circuit C, they can non-interactively compute using their evaluation keys and the ciphertext to get additive shares of the circuit output. Correctness requires that the shares add up to the circuit output, and security requires that the ciphertext preserves the privacy of the inputs. So in this work, we introduce the notion of multi-key homomorphic secret sharing. In multi-key HSS, we get rid of the correlated setup. Instead, we replace it with a CRS, a common reference string. So now, using the CRS, parties encode their inputs to get some public encoding of the input and some private state. They then send the public encodings to each other simultaneously. And now, as in HSS, they can evaluate to get additive shares of the circuit output. The correctness and security guarantees are as similar to that in HSS. So for the rest of this talk, I want to first go over some applications of multi-key HSS. Then I'll summarize our main results. And then I'll give a flavor of how we can construct multi-key HSS schemes. So yeah, let's dive into understanding some new applications that are enabled by multi-key HSS. So the main advantage of a multi-key HSS scheme compared to like a standard HSS scheme is that it gets rid of the correlated setup. This means that parties no longer have to interact in applications to generate the correlated setup. The first round is simply them sending their input encodings to each other. And the fact that the first round is the input encodings sent to each other means that the input encodings are reusable. So what do I mean by this? Say Alice has some input X, She encodes it using multi-key HSS and publishes her encoding. Now, Bob and Charlie can use the same encoding for multi-key HSS evaluation. And what's important here is that Bob and Charlie are using the same encoding of X, and this is not possible with standard HSS because each pair of parties would have a different correlated setup, which means there would be different public keys, and Alice would have had to send 2 ciphertexts under each public key. And all of our applications really exploit these 2 properties, that is the round reduction and the reusability of the input encoding. So yeah, let me go into the applications. The most immediate application is in secure computation, where basically Alice and Bob can encode their inputs, send it to each other in the first round. Then they evaluate to get additive shares, which they again send to each other in the second round to reconstruct and learn the output. The nice property of this protocol is that the total communication is actually sublinear in the size of the circuit, because the first round consists of the input encodings, which are independent of the circuit being evaluated. And the second round consists of additive shares, which is exactly the size of the output being, that parties compute. So, and the round reduction property of multi-key HSS basically yields a 2-round sublinear 2PC in the CRS model. Another application of multi-key HSS is in reducing the communication cost in the offline phase of MPC protocols. So many practical and efficient MPC protocols are in the pre-processing model, where parties first interact in the offline phase to generate some correlated randomness. This offline phase is independent of the inputs or the circuit itself that parties want to later evaluate. And then in the online phase, they use their inputs and this correlated randomness to compute the output. And in many MPC protocols, this correlated randomness is actually as large as the circuit that parties want to evaluate, which translates to a communication overhead in the offline phase in existing protocols. Public key PCFs are a primitive which basically shrink the offline communication to something that is independent of the circuit that is going to be evaluated. So what are they? Let's look at them in more detail. So in public key PCFs, the 2 parties locally sample a key pair and publish their public keys. Now when they want to generate correlated randomness, they use their secret keys and the public key of the other party to generate many pseudorandom correlations, non-interactively. In particular, we're interested in something known as additive correlations, where each party gets a pseudorandom value, here RA and RB, and additive shares of a correlation function evaluated on these pseudorandom values. So additive correlations capture a number of pre-processing or correlations used in MPC, like correlated OT, Beaver triples, oblivious linear evaluations, and so on. As a quick example, we can take a look at oblivious linear evaluation correlations. So if we set the correlation function to be a simple product, then we indeed get oblivious linear evaluation, where Alice's share acts as the constant term in the linear function. So it turns out, using multi-key HSS, there's a very natural construction of public key PCFs. What do? Each party sample a PRF key locally. They encode the PRF key using the multi-key HSS scheme and publish the encodings. Now when they want to generate correlated randomness, they first use their PRF keys and evaluate it to compute the pseudorandom value. Then within HSS, they recompute the PRF values and the correlation function. And because they're doing it within HSS, they end up with additive shares of the circuit output. And now they have exactly computed an additive pseudorandom correlation, which is what we wanted. And by evaluating the PRF at distinct points, they can compute an unbounded number of correlations, non-interactively. And what I want to focus here is on the offline phase, where basically each party just publishes a public key. And it's non-interactive, completely non-interactive. And this is made possible really because of the reusability of multi-key HSS input encodings. To see why, let's consider the case of multiple parties. The parties, again, just locally sample their keys and publish the encodings, as we just discussed. Now, say Alice and Bob want to generate correlated randomness. They use each other's encodings to generate the correlated randomness. Next, if Alice and Charlie wanted to generate correlated randomness, again, they can use each other's encodings to generate it. And what's important here is that both Bob and Charlie are using the same input encoding of Alice. The reusability is what allows us to use the input encoding of the PRF key as the PCF public key. Okay, so we've seen we can generate two-party correlations using multi-key HSS, but what about multi-party correlation, since often this is what we want in MPC protocols? So this is not immediately clear because multi-key HSS, as like I've defined in the presentation and what we construct later on, is really a two-party primitive. So we can't generically port it to multiple parties. But turns out the reusability of the input encodings actually allows us to construct multi-party public key PCFs for the specific case of beaver triples. So let me just give you a quick overview of how this looks like. So again, as before, parties sample a PRF key, publish the input and the PRF key encodings, and then they generate pairwise OLE correlations, and they can then locally aggregate these correlations to get beaver triple correlations. And this basically gives us a multi-party public key PCF for that can generate an unbounded number of beaver triple correlations. And again, what I want to focus here is on the offline phase, where each party just sends a single message. It's input encoding. And the total, this gives us a non-interactive offline phase where the total communication is just linear in the number of parties because each party just sends a single message. And again, this is possible because of the reusability of the encodings, right? Because we do this pairwise correlation first. So hopefully I've motivated how the key properties of multi-key HSS allow some new applications. So with this, let me quickly summarize our results. So in this work, we construct two-party multi-key HSS schemes for evaluating NC1 functions from group-based assumptions like DDH, DCR, and class groups, DDH over class groups. And this was previously only known from spooky encryption, which required the hardness of LWE or obfuscation. So comparing to prior HSS schemes from group-based assumptions, we basically get multi-key HSS from the same set of assumptions with the additional fact that we don't need correlated setup because that's the definition of multi-key HSS. Our DDH-based construction, like in prior works, has an inverse polynomial correctness error. Our DDH and class group constructions have transparent setup. And yeah, I'd also like to note that some of the prior works actually showed how to generate the correlated setup in one round. So basically, one round for correlated setup, the next round for input sharing, and then non-interactive evaluation. And in this case, the multi-key HSS really just shaves off the first round. So a lot of our applications, all our applications, in fact, were previously known only from assumptions known to imply FHE, and we get it from group-based assumptions. The first one, as we just looked at, is two-round sublinear 2PC for NC1 circuits in the CRS model. And compared to prior group-based constructions, the previous best-known group-based constructions, the best we could do was a three-round protocol in the CRS model, and we get a two-round protocol. The next set of applications really require multi-key HSS with negligible correctness error. So we can't get it from DDH, but we do get it from DCR and class group constructions. We construct something known as attribute-based non-interactive key exchange for NC1 predicates. In attribute-based non-interactive key exchange, parties have some private attributes, and it's a variant of non-interactive key exchange where they can derive a common key only if the attributes satisfy a predicate, else they don't learn anything about each other's attributes. And the next application is we construct public key PCFs for NC1 additive correlations. And this, like I just mentioned, includes the number of correlations used in MPC. Previously, from group-based assumptions, the best we could construct was public key PCFs for OT correlations and vector OLE, and we generalize it to arbitrary NC1, again, and specifically this includes things like beaver triples, which were not known previously. Finally, using our multi-party public key PCFs for beaver triples, we get a multi-party protocol, MPC protocol, where the offline phase communication is independent of the circuit size and linear in the number of parties. And the online phase communication essentially is, each party communicates something proportional to the circuit size. And previously from group-based assumptions, we only, the offline phase communication had a quadratic overhead. So in the time that I have left, I'll quickly go over how to construct multi-key HSS schemes. So let's start by taking a quick overview of like how prior group-based HSS schemes work. All of them actually support evaluating something known as restricted multiplication straight line programs. So in a restricted multiplication straight line programs, there are inputs, and then there are intermediate values of the computation known as memory values. And it supports the following instructions. We can load inputs to memory. We can add two memory values to get another memory value of the sum. And then we can multiply an input value and a memory value to get a memory value of the product. What's important is we can't multiply two memory values, and this is why it's called a restricted multiplication program. And finally, the program outputs some specified memory value. Boyle, Gilboa, and Desai showed that the class of NC1 circuits is actually a subset of the RMS programs, which is why I stated results from NC1 functions previously. And all the group-based HSS schemes until now basically do a distributed evaluation of RMS programs. What do I mean by this? So the parties have encryptions of the inputs. Then they evaluate the RMS program instruction by instruction to ensure that they have a sharing of each memory value. In particular, the non-trivial component here is how do we multiply an encryption of the input with a memory share? And yeah, let's take a closer look at this. So to sort of understand this better, I'm going to describe the structure of the input encodings and the memory shares. The input encodings consists of two Elgamal ciphertexts under the public key, which was in the correlated setup. And the first encryption is the encryption of the value itself, and the second is an encryption of the value times the secret key. And while I won't explain how, it's possible to compute both of these with some additional material in the correlated setup. You don't really need the secret key itself to compute these encryptions. A memory share consists of two parts. It consists of an additive share of the memory value and an additive share of the secret key times the memory value. So now let's say we want to multiply the input x with a memory value y. The core ingredient to do this is an algorithm given by Boyle, Gilboa, and Desai, which basically takes an encryption of some message x, a memory share, and it outputs an additive share of the product. So let's see how we can use this to do RMS program evaluations, maintain the RMS program invariant that we wanted. So parties use the encryption of x with the memory share of y to get an additive share of xy. The parties next use the encryption of the secret key times x to get an additive share of the secret key times xy. Now note that this is actually nothing but a memory share of xy. So we've actually just, we've maintained our invariant, and we can actually do RMS program evaluation. So now let's go to the multi-key setting. In the multi-key setting, we no longer have a correlated setup, which means that the parties don't have a common public key using which they can encrypt their inputs. But is it possible to use the distributed multiplication algorithm in this case too? Let's try and see. So the natural step is, okay, parties locally sample public keys, keep a public key pair, and they encode their inputs as in the previous case, but under their locally sampled key pairs. And now, let's say a memory share consists of an additive secret sharing of the memory value, as well as an additive secret sharing of the memory value times Alice and Bob's secret keys. So given this, can we recover multiplication? So if you want to multiply, let's say, x with z, we could first multiply an encryption of x and use the memory share additive shares of z and Alice's secret key times z to get an additive share of xz. We could do the same with Alice's secret key times x, the encryption of Alice's secret key times x to get an additive share of Alice's secret key times xz. But the third component of the memory share is Bob's secret key times xz. And to compute this, we need an encryption of Bob's secret key times x. And this is not part of Alice's input encoding. And in fact, this is the main challenge with multi-key HSS. It seems that to use the distributed multiplication algorithm, we need an encryption of Bob's secret key times Alice's input, which they can't compute non-interactively, right? Because Alice does not even know Bob's secret key at that point. And we really need the additive shares of Bob's secret key times xc, because later on, when we want to multiply with Bob's input encoding, these shares are necessary. So the main technical contribution is in our work is a new encryption scheme which allows synchronizing ciphertext. So what do I mean by this? So as before, parties locally sample a key pair. And to encode their inputs, they simply encrypt using this new encryption scheme. This encryption scheme now supports a new algorithm called synchronize, which basically takes the secret key and the public key of the other party, and it can synchronize the input ciphertext to an encryption of the underlying message and the Alice's secret key and Bob's secret key times the message under the concatenated public key. And all of this is non-interactive, of course. So what do I mean by concatenated public key? Basically, each encryption consists of two parts, where the first part encrypts some random value r under Alice's key, and the second part encrypts x minus r under Bob's key. So it's basically encrypting additive shares under Alice's and Bob's public keys. And turns out this actually helps recover multiplication. So let me just quickly give you tell you why. So we could use the encryption of r under Alice's key with the memory share to get additive shares of r times z. So this is just nothing but some share r times the memory value z. Similarly, we could multiply skb times x minus r, and like I'm considering the third. I'm considering the third ciphertext here because that was the challenging part in the previous case. And now we get Bob's secret key times x minus r times z. And now if we just add these two together, we actually get the memory share that we wanted, the additive share that we wanted, which is Bob's secret key times xz, where x is actually Alice's input. And similarly, Bob can do the symmetric computation to get his share of this value. And now we've actually recovered our invariant. We have the complete memory sharing, and which means that we can evaluate RMS programs. So yeah, I'll conclude with that. Thanks for your attention. Happy to take questions.
Hey, nice talk. I have two questions. The first one is about why can you not achieve two-party sublinear MPC from the public key the public key, the HSS with public key set up from Pyre Algama?
Because two-party sublinear computation, sorry?
Oh, sorry, for two parties, if you want to obtain two-round sublinear secure computation, why can you not achieve this from the protocol? This is in the rise of Pyre, the public key.
Yeah, so I think I understand your question.
Yeah.
So that construction only allows one multiplication, so you wouldn't be able to evaluate NC1 circuits using it. And if you interact over multiple rounds, let's say it won't be 2 rounds. So what we're really claiming is a 2-round sublinear protocol.
Oh.
So you would get like you could probably evaluate like a linear function, one single linear function using that construction.
Okay, sure. And isn't there this paper of like Boyle, Coteau, and Mayer from 2023 or 2022, which they do this like peer-style sublinear MPC?
But I think that's over multiple rounds, if I'm not wrong.
I think it's just a peer-style. Like you have like one query, like, and then one response and decoding, I think.
Okay, and I'm not very aware of the techniques there, but is it in the CRS model?
Yeah, because they use rate 1 batch OT.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the techniques. I can get back to you later, though.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Hello, nice talk. So I wonder what is the kinds of domains supported by this construction? So what rings or fields can you compute over?
Yeah, good question. So for the DDH-based construction, we can support polynomial-sized bounded integers. So none of them support like full rings, ring computation. It's or you could, okay, sorry, let me rephrase that. So for DDH-based constructions, you could support polynomial-sized integer rings. For the DCR and class group constructions, you could support any exponentially sized integer ring. But there is a small caveat in the sense that it's really what they support underneath is a bounded integer computation. So you can't have overflows.
Okay. And then you mentioned that one of the applications is pseudo-random correlation functions.
Yeah.
So I guess that requires, like on the slide where you sketched this, it is required evaluating a PRF inside of the HSS.
Yes, that's right.
So are you aware of any suitable PRF candidates that can be evaluated using the domains which and the circuit sizes which you support?
Yeah, so that's not a problem in our case because we support NC1 circuits or even like RMS programs, and the assumptions that we use like DDH, DCR, and so on already imply PRFs in these classes. So we don't need to make any new assumptions for evaluating PRFs within the given, within HSS.
Okay, and then like the PRF outputs, are they are then over pseudo-random over the let's say large ring?
So you could just do it over bits and then aggregate them, recompose the bits in some sense to get it over the larger ring. Because really what we want is finally like integers, right? So
yeah, that's why I'm asking. So
yeah.
And then including this recomposition, and then afterwards you would then, for your correlation, want to do, if you want to do beaver triples, you would first need to recompose the bits into like a larger value, and then also support an additional multiplication. So all of this is supported?
Yeah, all of this is possible, but like again, like theoretically, like of course, I'm not claiming it's concretely efficient. But yeah, you could evaluate the PRF, get a random bit, and then compute this multiple times, recompose to get like larger integers and so on. The combination itself does not really add any overhead because it's just linear. So you can do all of this. It's not going to be efficient though.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
In case if public key PCF, while calculating multi-key HSS fails, how you are going to manage? And
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
in case if public key PCF fails, how you are going to manage as?
Sorry, why would it fail? I don't think I understand. What do you mean by fail actually?
Fail in the sense if it shows any wrong output or.
So if our multi-key HSS has negligible correctness error, which is true for our DCR and class group based constructions, the public key PCF will fail with negligible probability. So it will not fail as far as we care about in applications.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for the nice talk, Aditya. So let's take any other questions offline. Okay. Thanks the speaker again.
So now we are going to, so yesterday we had a very nice session from one of our sponsors from Data for Public Good. And today we are going to have yet another session, and this will be from Silence Laboratories. And they're doing some fantastic work, practical work in the MPC space. They're building products, which hopefully is going to touch many lives. And on behalf of Silence Laboratories, Kush is going to give the talk. Okay, the stage is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kush, and I'm going to be talking about how Silence Laboratories is tackling some of the key challenges in the industry today using MPC. And it's not just theoretical innovations. We are making real, tangible, and applicable use cases with businesses today. Yeah. So sharing and analyzing data which is siloed is fundamentally broken today. Data is logged in silos, and essentially there are few challenges in terms of collaboration. There are privacy concerns, so no company wants to expose sensitive data, even if it could benefit them. There are regulatory barriers. Essentially, compliance frameworks makes it difficult for cross-border collaboration and for inter or intra-industry collaboration. And there's competition, where businesses fear losing sensitive secrets which they have to their competitors, and hence losing their competitive edge. All this leads to essentially business inefficiencies, financial losses, and lost monetization opportunities. On the other hand, if privacy isn't maintained, the consequences can be massive for businesses, for economies, and for consumer trust. So organizations should never consider like a trade-off between data utility and data privacy. So the impact of lack of privacy is very significant. Data breaches incur an average of $4.8 million losses to businesses. There have been rising data breaches, and yet the opportunity to, for secure data collaboration is $2.2 trillion, which is roughly 2.5% of the global GDP. Consumer trust has been increasingly, it has a significant impact on the businesses. And we have seen that data breaches are rising, and on the other hand, privacy regulations have been coming up and have seen like a lot of traction in the recent past. So roughly 80% of the countries have some form of regulation related to privacy in place. So the question is, a question actually should not be whether lack of collaboration is a concern or not. It should be more around how quickly can we solve it. So how can we maximize the socio-economic value of data ecosystems ethically? And to answer that, we at Silence Laboratories are building a cryptographic computing virtual machine. This CCVM enables a privacy-preserving inference marketplace where organizations can collaborate on their sensitive secrets without exchanging any raw information. So imagine a platform where data providers can simply plug in their data sources. Logic and analytic providers can simply provide the logic for computation, and organizations seeking inferences out of the data can simply query the required information and just get the inferences for the specific use case. This is what we envision. So this marketplace could serve any industry, any use case, and allow any organization to simply use their own logic and extract inferences from the raw data. So yeah, this is the platform that we are building, and I'll discuss a few real-world use cases that we are actually solving for using our CCVM. Right. So let's take open banking. Open banking essentially allows non-banking financial institutions to access customers' banking data in a consented way. So while it is a positive step towards innovation in order to offer new services to the customers, there's an inherent trust gap between the banks and the fintechs. And the reason for that is that the usage of the data by the fintech is unclear. So for example, what if you apply for a loan, the fintech wants to analyze your credit worthiness, and instead they're cross-selling you credit cards, let's say. So that's one of the challenges in terms of the lack of trust gaps, another challenge is the lack of clarity and control over the consent mechanisms. So I'll just share some stats here which highlights the severity of the problem. We conducted a survey as well to understand customers' perception of financial data sharing practices. And it showed that there's a perception of privacy, control, and clarity in terms of data sharing terms, but the ground truth is very different from it. So we have been working in this space, publishing white papers and frameworks, one of which was presented by Yash yesterday in one of the talks. And we are working with some design partners to change a couple of things. So one, we are enabling processing of banking data via MPC to exchange only the inferences with the fintech companies. Second, we are tying this computation to the consent terms. So as a customer, whatever I consent to is only what should be processed on the data and nothing else. And finally, we are also redesigning the economic incentive distribution model based on the exact usage of that data. So what we wish is for like a fair distribution of economic value with both upstream and downstream players. Okay, so another interesting use case is that of cross-border data collaboration. Data localization principles laid out in privacy laws and lack of standardization in terms of regulations across jurisdictions makes cross-border data transfers restricted and slow. Often the compliance checks performed during cross-border transactions yield a lot of false positives. And the reason for that is only limited data about a customer can be exchanged. This causes transactions to be manually reviewed, which leads to delays, inefficiencies, and it incurs additional cost to businesses. So as you can see, the magnitude of the problem is huge, with roughly about $3 trillion worth of fraud happening globally, and just less than 1% of it being actually caught. So we have implemented private set intersection with one of our partners, which is Bank of International Settlements, where we are moving PSI to production with 4 central banks in the APAC region for compliance checks in a privacy-preserving way, where the details of the transacting party and the details of the proprietary data sets and models remain private. The ability to do this in a privacy-preserving way also unlocks more data. So now you can screen customer with more confidence, more accuracy, and fewer false positives. Okay, so another area where fraud causes losses worth of millions of dollars globally is trade financing. So a lot of the international trade-related details, a lot of international trade requires details of the trade to be shared with multiple parties, be it the regulators, be it the traders, be it the logistic players, be it the financial lenders, and other organizations. So there are data collaboration is of utmost importance, and there are also many frauds which are happening in trade financing. For example, one of them is duplicate invoicing, where traders avail financing from multiple institutions using the same invoice. Now the problem with that is that banks and lenders can't talk to each other in terms of whether a particular invoice has been financed already or not. Either they'll have to exchange the details of the customers, details of the trade with other parties, which is currently not possible because of privacy and regulatory restrictions. So what if banks and lenders could talk to each other? Frauds could have been prevented in real time. You could have also screened customer located in different jurisdictions, assessing their financial health without worrying about any data residency issues. So yeah, these are some of the few use cases that we have been, where collaboration is unlocked because of MPC, and it has significant monetary and trust impact on businesses. The idea of using MPC is not just to improve the privacy guarantees in collaboration, but also to unlock data which was previously inaccessible, therefore leading to better outcomes for the businesses. Okay, so we have also actually taken a lot of thought leadership initiatives in this space in few areas to initiate conversations around privacy and compliance by design in established frameworks. So for example, lately we have been working with Carnegie Mellon University to design a consent framework which obtains informed and meaningful consent for inferences from the customer. So essentially, rather than it being a mere check in the box exercise, it's now a more informed consent for inferences. And we are also defining the compute framework for data custody, essentially, and collaboration, defining the roles of organizations, their rights, and creating consent frameworks, while also cryptographically enforcing those frameworks during the collaboration process. So ultimately, we would want to create consortiums that will help create standards for inference networks, again, rather than the data networks, for using customer data, for applications such as private data vaults and public inference networks. So we also annually organize a conference called Decompute in Singapore, which brings technologists, researchers, and industry players under a roof to exchange thoughts, ideas, and developments in decentralized security via MPC. So last year, we had Abhi Shalat and Elliot Boyle as the keynote speakers, along with about 30 other speakers, to share key insights on some of the topics which are listed here, around digital assets, decentralized security, data privacy, and so on. We also conduct workshops and roundtables across different cities to spark conversations around the application of PETs and MPC in practical industry use cases. As a part of our upcoming research roadmap, we have interesting focus areas, including post-quantum signing, an expressive compiler, privacy-preserving machine learning, and identifiable abort. So these are in the pipeline. Our team also heavily focuses on research for applied cryptography, and we have published 10 plus papers in top conferences across the globe. We are also actively working with visiting faculties and have research partnerships and collaborations with some of the leading organizations. So yeah, if you're interested or working in any of these fields, do reach out to us, whether as a visiting faculty, intern, or a full-time engineering or research side. We are happy to collaborate to solve some of the pressing concerns in the industry. So yeah, with that, I'll conclude my talk. If you have any questions around the business side or the use cases, I'm happy to answer them. Any questions related to the tech side or the research side, we have a booth outside and we can connect. I'm happy to connect you with someone from my research team. So thank you.
In trade financing, are you making use of blockchain also so as to narrow down the fraudulent transactions?
That is one way to go. Yes, that is possible, but we are not limiting ourselves just to blockchain technology. Essentially, the idea is to create a network or a network of organizations who will be contributing as inputs the invoices which have already been financed. Now, those can be put on blockchain, or simply we can have like a PSI match for checking whether a new invoice which was recently shared, has it already been financed?
With enough inferences learned, this would probably be susceptible to inference-based attacks. And if you were to use mechanisms like differential privacy, I don't think, because you need to learn exact inferences, right? Because it's a financial application. So any ideas as to how to prevent or perhaps lessen the impact of inference attacks?
That's a good question. I think a couple of things which we are working on which can help with that. One is the idea of tying consent with compute, which I talked about. So you as a user can choose what inferences the institution can get, who's requesting your information. So I as a user can select only what's relevant for me and not anything additional to get more information about me. That's one. And the other side of it is essentially we can have an orchestrator who can ensure there's no privacy leakage, what you're talking about, by only allowing certain opcodes to be run on the data rather than any random function. So I obviously can as simple as defining a simple copy function, copy all your data. But there needs to be an orchestrator who can ensure that only predefined opcodes or predefined functions relevant to a certain use cases can be run. Yeah.
Hi, another question. Thanks for the nice presentation. I'm interested in this PSI deployment. Could you tell more if this is like a plain PSI intersecting some IDs or hash values, or is this some more PSI variant computing also on other things?
I think our research team would be better equipped to answer that question, so maybe we can catch up outside, and then I'll be happy to connect you.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
Hi. So you were talking a lot about having a framework for consent, and you were using financial institute as a motivation, but isn't this a lot based on legitimate interest? Because if you want to commit fraud, you say, I don't give you consent, so how can they do this like a consent-based inference to make sure that you are not committing fraud?
So consent would be provided by the owner of the data. So for example, if let's say I am a customer of a bank and a fintech wants my data, the bank is a mere custodian of that information, and I am the actual owner of my information, which is with the bank. So I'll be providing the consent, and I'll be ensuring only what's relevant for me to avail that financial service is shared with that financial institution. For me, the requirement to share the information is to avail that financial service. So there's some trade-off, but essentially, at least we are guaranteeing that one, you are not seeing any raw plain text. You're not seeing every single transaction I'm making with my bank. And secondly, I'm only communicating whatever minimum required inference is needed by the financial institution in order to provide me that service.
If you are in a business-to-business setting, don't you have like a contract between these two that prevents this need of like consent management? Because in here you are saying that data doesn't belong to the person mentioned in the data, but a company who holds the data.
Yes, so I am the owner of the data. Consent will always be provided by me. There are bilateral agreements or contracts or some form of legal arrangements between the institutions when they are collaborating on data. However, let's say one of them breaches the contract. They may face regulatory penalties, but my data will have been lost, right? So contracts can't be enforced in the usage if someone wants to act as a bad actor. So as a user, I need to have control over my own data, have control over what I want to share, with whom I want to share, and how I want them to use it.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Let's thank the speaker for a nice talk. It's time to enjoy some delicious dishes outside. They are waiting. And let's have the lunch break from 1 to 2 p.m. And for the post-lunch session, let's meet at 2 p.m. Thanks. Yeah, you can use the left door on the left side for the lunch, for going for the lunch.